So, hi guys, Tarke here, and I would like to give special thanks to Jonathan for coming on. And we are joined by Nugiyen, Octavian, and Raiz. For anyone who doesn't know exactly who you are, as the technical director and one of the co-founders of GGG, what does that title actually mean?
So basically, as the name would imply, I'm in charge of the tech. What that really means is people come into my office and bother me with questions all day. I mean, that's kind of honestly most of my job at this point is like knowing how everything in the company works, and thus kind of there's not many people who sort of know that. So yeah, that's kind of mostly is just answering people's questions and so on. But I also do some design as well. So me and Chris especially will work together on designing leagues and stuff like that. And I've been heavily involved with all of the recent leagues and so on. So yeah, I mean, I do sort of quite a lot of different things, but yes, mostly in charge of making sure our tech is on the right track.
That's fair enough. Also, chat, just for anyone tuning out, that we do have a slight kettle in the background. It's something we can't fix. Microphone issues, it's whatever.
If you really want, I could change over to using my iPhone. I bet you the microphone and that would be better. But the problem with that is you won't get video then.
And I think we'll probably be alright as is. And also, knowing my luck, your phone would explode in your hand, and then I'd be responsible for like killing you or something. So yeah,
tea kettle's not so bad.
It's fine.
No. This is a familiar sound for Tarke.
Yeah, I am British. It makes me feel quite nostalgic. Okay then. So to start off with, before we get into the super technical nitty-gritty stuff, Betrayal. What was like everyone's first reactions other than yes, Einhar is finally back?
More than expected in other areas than Masters, at least for me. It seems like the Masters are the least exciting thing in a way, and everything else is just like crazy. And it's not that the Masters aren't exciting, it's just that there's so much. It's really going after the whole game, especially the thing with rearranging the entire atlas that I don't think anybody really expected.
So
it has major implications.
We're really keen to rearrange the atlas more often going forward. Just because it's one of those things that, I mean, so it's interesting actually, because there's a lot of players who don't really get to high tier maps and, that sort of thing. And it's actually kind of nice to rearrange the maps just so that they actually get a chance to play the lower, the highest, the bosses that are in higher tier maps they don't normally get to play and just sort of do that sort of thing. So it's sort of nice to just, rearrange things every now and then. Also, the end game kind of gets a little bit stale over time. So it's good to change things up and add a few more maps and move things around and so on. So we're actually, this expansion, we decided to invest in making it easier for us to do Atlas changes without having to, in terms of like rearranging maps, without having to do so much manual laborious work. Because in the past, every base item type, we had effectively had to duplicate that for each map series. And then that was really annoying. There was like tons of random metadata and so on. So then now we've sort of, made it so we can just do that without, having to do a ton of manual work. You pretty much just like shift them around on the atlas, change the tiers, and then you're good to go. So yeah, it's gonna help a bit when we're doing that in the future.
Yeah, I personally really prefer that, to be honest, because in the past it did seem, well, with the current atlas, it does seem like there's some sort of order in terms of like actual scaling. I prefer a little bit of the randomness, to be honest. Right. And yeah, that's really cool that you guys can just work it out like that.
We will be able to soon.
Yeah.
I just
oftentimes
really
in general, I think I do feel really bad for all the people with the guides and everything like that. But I mean, this affects everything, right? Because oftentimes people focus on like specific skills and abilities and all this sort of stuff, when we're in reality, I mean, changing up the atlas can change up the meta in quite a significant way.
Well, I mean,
especially if Burial Chambers is tier 12 now, 14. Burial Chambers, maybe
I'm not sure where it's been put, but yeah, I mean, it is a good idea. Also, yeah, just to shake up the meta in terms of where people are grinding and so on. Like, it's nice to just have a change ideally each season, but we'll see what we can do in terms of how often we can do it. But yeah, it will be a lot less work for us now.
Are there certain like maps with certain bosses that you might leave at higher tiers because they're like iconic, like Kitava, Lake?
It's actually less about being iconic and more about that we want it so that bosses that have the most challenging mechanics are high end. Like there are some bosses that would be really hard to make not high tier, if you know what I mean, because of the mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you can turn the balance down, but that isn't necessarily going to make them easy. So yeah, so I mean, for example, Katava. I mean, yeah, and there is a little bit of iconic stuff going on as well. I mean, we want Katava to stay on red maps just because like he's Katava and he probably should be there. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of it's mostly the difficulty that's the concern with regard to not being able to shift a map from one place to another.
One question on that with the whole betrayal mechanic. So when we have the syndicate come in to like assassinate us, are they like boss equivalent health values or like?
I actually don't know what the exact like balance details of that are, since it's not really my department. But like Mark II would definitely know that. But what I can tell you with regard to that is they can attack you while you're fighting a boss. They don't always do that, and it's going to make the boss fight a lot harder if that happens. So I mean, the intention is that they can kind of come in. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's a really inopportune moment. There's like stuff like that. Like they're kind of designed to cause a bit of extra chaos when they're coming in to assassinate you.
Yeah.
I think
those
the
sort of
worst would
factors
be
are
like
always
halfway through an Uber trial or something, like start of league, no gear.
Oh god.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure about the exact rules behind that specific case, but yeah, that's the intention is to cause a bit of pain in some circumstances, and they're quite variable as well because it could just be one guy, it could be like up to 4 guys, so they can be in rare cases, so it can be pretty nasty. So
there's like a large series of events then within all the different syndicates. It's not just like the same one over and over again then.
So the different each different division has their own type of what would you call it? Like an encounter type, I guess. And so they're the same in the sense that there's the group that the transport people always have the cart pushing thing, but where there's variability is more about the interaction between the different syndicate members coming in. So you've got so an example is they come in to help each other, they can come in and fight each other and that kind of thing. And then of course, since they all have different skills themselves, and they also have different items that they can be given, which do different things. It makes the combat quite different each time you encounter them. So the items were a sort of like a wild card that means that hopefully each time you fight someone, they sort of feel a little bit different because they've gained or lost certain items that do things. So yeah.
Before we get crazy off topic already, Octavian, what was your opinion of the new league when it came out?
Just like limited to the new league or the whole expansion?
If we do like betrayal stuff first, and then we can go like crazy off there.
I'm really excited to see more specific information on like how the crafting system works with like the replacement of master crafting and all that, and veiled mods in particular. But generally speaking, I'm just hyped as all hell for betrayal. And actually, in particular, veiled mods, because it seems like it's going to offer a real depth and longevity to crafting over the course of the league that's not really been there before. And there might even be a market for veiled items that haven't been unveiled yet, so that you can keep adding those to your crafting. What do you want to call it? Like your crafting backlog, your knowledge,
like the upgrade system thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Niggy?
I was a little bit surprised with Raiz saying that he was surprised with how much they were adding, because I mean, in the sense that I don't know if you were that surprised, but I think that when they do say that the new expansion is going to be the largest one yet, I mean, I think we can come to expect that it's actually going to be pretty overwhelming, the amount of stuff they're going to throw at us. So I feel like they've been like, it's nice to see that whenever they say things are going to be like they're going to throw a lot of us at us, that they're actually following through. So that's been really nice. So 4.0 better be big, but I think it will be.
Hopefully we're going to overhype you too much on that, because like by the time we actually get there, it'll be like you'll be expecting something maybe too ridiculous. But we are trying to do. I mean, the thing I said on a different podcast recently is we were designing 4.0 to compete with whatever Diablo 4 is. So we
Mm.
basically have to make sure we're bringing the maximum amount of firepower to bear
Yeah, for
on
sure.
what we're creating there. So yeah, it's actually this expansion is actually a sort of part of like a 4 expansion arc that we planned, where we were really keen, because we were effectively trying to replace the old masters, right? I mean, we knew a year ago, or more than a year ago, that they all needed to be replaced. But it's kind of like we were like, okay, so the problem with the original masters is like we did it in 1 expansion, and it was also back when our expansions were like way more willy-nilly, and of course the company was smaller and the content was worse and like all these other things. So we were kind of like, okay, if we do an expansion with like a bunch more masters all in one, that's going to be really hard for us to make each mechanic like really good by itself, and we didn't want to just create a bunch of masters which had kind of crappy mechanics individually again, because that would be a waste of obviously everyone's time. So what we kind of needed to do was work out a way that we could add new masters where each mechanic was really awesome. And the best way we thought to do it was to introduce each one as a league master and then bring them all back in the end. And of course, the nice thing about it as well is that it kind of gave us an opportunity to revisit some of them that we didn't do so well and kind of change up the mechanic by testing it in a league, which is always a really nice thing about leagues, is we can, test something there and then modify it later. So yeah, basically, so obviously Beastry being a big example of like, people reacted somewhat negatively to that. So we learned a lot from that and changed how that worked up a lot in order for the master to be good. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, it's good that we're sort of completing that arc now. Because that was a sort of hairy one, and it was actually really tough design wise, because there was kind of this question of like, at what point do we kind of like make these into masters, or do we like do it all in one go, or do we kind of like try to slow roll them out? Like one option obviously was to like make each one a master after each league was complete. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of didn't end up really feeling right. Like we really wanted to have them all sort of like a big changeover, because we thought it would start cool. So yeah, so that's what happened with that. Yeah.
One thing
That's mostly what I'm talking about too. That I said that it's not the masters, but really it is. It's just that what the masters offer was the thing that to me was a little bit unexpected, because it's so many different things in one. And typically these these releases would mostly be like, oh, we're focusing on endgame, we're focusing on something, and now it's like everything all at once. It doesn't just seem like a general release where it's just one thing. It's just like 5 different things. So to me, it's like 5 times bigger than the usual, rather than like twice as big or slightly bigger than Delve or something like that. It's way bigger.
One thing just quickly, Jonathan, if you go into your audio settings in Discord, there's like gain suppression and stuff, and if fiddling with those might help the kettle slightly. I'll just say that now, otherwise chat will literally kill me.
Okay.
But while you fiddle with that, just sort of have a play with it, and we'll tell you if it gets any better.
You should appreciate this, chat. Come on, Tarke is really doing this against his nature. He loves this stuff. He feels at home.
I do really enjoy the whistling. I think one reason. Oh, go on.
If I change input volume down, that didn't make it better. It just made me quieter, did it?
Yeah, but it's because you're using a laptop microphone. The only thing which might maybe help is there's like echo cancellation and stuff. Like, is an option.
Oh, I can scroll down. Okay, no,
that's advanced.
Yeah, all that stuff is on. Echo cancellation, noise suppression, automatic gain control. It's all.
Maybe try turning gain control off.
Okay. Automatic gain control is now off.
Oh.
I don't hear whistling.
Oh.
Wait.
Hey.
Or is it just quiet?
No, it's fine. I think we fixed it.
Well, if I turn input volume up...
No, leave it. It's fine. Leave it.
Whatever you have. This is working.
Wow.
Bring back the kettle.
Now, this is exactly how you fix desync, correct? It was the exact same process. You just flipped a switch and the servers were fine.
Oh, there's more settings down here.
Oh, if you scroll in the graphics options, there's the turn off desync button. Interesting.
Yeah, okay. Great.
I mean, imagine this. Imagine you've sat around all day and you had like a slight tinnitus, and then it's just gone.
Yeah. I've actually been developing tinnitus recently. It's awful.
It is really bad. I get it like on and off when I wake up, and if I ever take my headphones off after a stream, just like. So yeah. But one thing I was really interested to ask you, since obviously with how much of this expansion has the returning masters, a lot of people are excited for like Einhar and stuff like that. Like, if you could say there was one thing to really get people excited about Betrayal rather than the stuff coming with it, what would that be?
So honestly, like the thing that's just really cool about this league is just so it's kind of a little bit like Incursion, where you sort of get to customize something, you know, like a thing. But in this case, we're talking about the Syndicate. So I mean, honestly, it's just really fun, just like fiddling around with that, and you know, like having all the relationships and so on. We've never done such a character-heavy expansion before. Like the amount of dialogue and like craziness, and then all of the people like remember things about you as well. So when you like they've got like, I mean, I'm a programmer talking here, so they've got like a bunch of flags internally where they all sort of remember the different things that you've done to them, and then they sort of bring that up, and then we've got like a big filter with the voice acting where it's like, okay, this person's got like, you know, 300 lines or whatever. And then we've got to filter down into like what ones that they can say given the situation. So it means that they sort of just feel like they've got some personality, and it's pretty cool. So you know, and it's sort of interesting. Like, you know, we do the voice acting like probably about like sort of 2 or 3 weeks before the league comes out, because it's kind of, you want to do it as late as possible because you know, so you get all the changes in there. But in this case, we really had to start like, you know, it was like 6 weeks out or something like that from league release, just because there's so much to record and so much things. So yeah, it's quite just a huge thing from that perspective. And of course, you know, like obviously the rewards. We're actually finishing some of the reward stuff now. There's actually a lot going on. Like, so more than just veiled mods, there's also a lot more going on with the rewards in the safe houses when you raid them than we've kind of talked about. So I mean, you know, it's kind of like how in Incursion, when there was kind of some interesting stuff in the temple that you could get in tier 3, like, you know, we're trying to have that same sort of thing going on, where there's some interesting stuff you can find.
Got any examples?
I mean, I'd probably better not, because I'm sure that Beck would kill me if I started teasing things without consulting her. But there's some interesting stuff in terms of rewards there, as well as veiled mods. Well, in fact, the veiled mods are more about what you get just when you kill the syndicate members just in the world, like during their events, they drop veiled monsters. But whereas the safe houses, like, you know, the sort of, you know, the big rewards of, you know, when you are able to do the safe house, you get like a lot of interesting things. So yeah.
And just to confirm, is there an event in like every zone, like every map you're on, every story zone?
So every area there is an event that to do with the syndicate.
Okay.
And yeah, it's going to be one of the different types. And then yeah, there can be several guys that come in, and then you know, you kill them, you get some loot for that, and then you also change the syndicate. And then once you've got enough intelligence by interrogating enough people and like if you're doing various bargain options and other stuff like that, then you can run the safe house. Okay.
So yeah, that is.
And then when you run enough safe houses, then you can then find out who the actual boss of the syndicate is.
That does sound very similar to Incursion, with like an extra layer above it of finding out who the syndicate boss is after you do the.
Similar in structure, but one thing we really one thing that was a concern in Incursion though was that it didn't really extend out into the end game far enough. Like people kind of, we actually found that retention long term in that league was lower than normal I think it was because there really wasn't enough kind of going on at map tier that was kind of interesting and changed up the game. So that's why we kind of made sure with this design that we included like an extra tier above the sort of main tier. So if you could imagine each safe house kind of like doing an Incursion temple, but then there's like this extra tier above that, which is like doing the, you know, the sort of the end game, like full sort of counter, which across multiple safe houses. So it's kind of got that extra tier above that, which kind of makes it so that it sort of extends more into maps. And you know, you'll be doing more of those fights as you kind of get higher up. So yeah.
So the rewards, do they also reflect the increased difficulty?
Yeah, so there are rewards you only get from you know, from that final boss, which I'm struggling to not say the name of because I keep on. You know, obviously, when I'm in the office talking about it, we just say the name. So you know.
Don't worry about it. Just go for it. You know.
I don't know if that's the best advice.
Just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, if you're like the only person who really understands all of the code, they can't really get rid of you over saying a name on a podcast.
I've got some job security here. But, yeah.
So that's actually one thing that I'm actually quite excited about, because we had that a little bit with Elder, where we had like white, yellow, red, then like Uber Elder, and then it seemed like we didn't have much of that afterwards. So it's quite cool to you're kind of going back to that like layers of end game content which you can access like early and also late.
Right. We are also going to be doing another, like, probably, you know, at some point, we probably do have to do another in-game expansion. Maybe not the next one, maybe the one after that. I don't know exactly, but it's going to come about again. We have to kind of really shuffle things up there again. So, you know, like, we're always doing these things. We're going back and forth between, you know, focusing on different areas, as you were saying before. So it's definitely going to have to come up sometime soon, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So what was, like, the hardest thing either for you technically or within the office then when it came to like completing this for like expansion arc thing in Betrayal?
So, you know, actually there is actually a hardest thing, and I think that in order to talk about it, I'm actually going to spoil something which a lot of people have guessed at, but I'm going to confirm just because it makes my story easier, which is that the old masters are actually in the syndicate as bosses that you fight. So I mean, this is something obviously a lot of people we'd kind of like we were very much hinting towards the
mysterious disappearance.
Yeah, exactly. They mysteriously disappeared. Where could they have gone? You know. So anyway, so that was a thing that I actually was really pushing for this myself. There were other people who were very skeptical of this because for various reasons. But I was like, okay, I really wanted to involve the old masters in some way, just the characters that people know, and like, okay, they may not. And the problem was though that a lot of like, okay, so Chris's biggest fear, this was like the thing that he said like multiple times as we were discussing this, was like, okay, like we can't announce a league and be like, oh, like, you know, the old masters are there, because people's first reaction are gonna be like, oh, I hate the old masters because their missions suck. And so it's like we have to announce a league in a way where it's like the message is not like, hey, remember the old masters? They're back. You know, it has to be like, you know, that's not like the selling point. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, the masters are back, but they're back as characters. They're not back like with their old gameplay. You know what I mean? You know, like they're there. We did actually like re-rig them and like they look better now, but they've kind of got like updated art as well. You know, like in line, because you know they need to be. The old rigs are terrible that they had, and like, you know, we need to animate them having cool boss skills and stuff now. So, you know. But anyway, yeah. So the old masters, they're back. That's the marketing line we didn't want, but now I can tell you. And yeah, and that is the name of the league, right? Betrayal is absolutely the name of the league because of the old masters. So you know. So yeah, anyway, it was a really hard to design a league that involved them, so we didn't have to kind of throw them away as characters, but also kind of didn't have them as the focus. And so yeah, we argued a huge amount about that. We came through a ton of different league ideas, and then kind of like we sort of thought about, hey, like, hang on, so like, what are systems and games that you know, could use a lot of characters? And we actually realized, like, hey, like the Nemesis system was something that was like really awesome. From Shadow of Mordor, that was something we looked at. It was like really inspired some of the ideas for this league. So that was like a really nice thing. And we thought, like, how could we really do that? You know, we've got a stable of characters. Like, we're going to need like a bunch more characters. So we had to come up with like, I think there were like 18 characters in the Immortal Syndicate. So that's like quite a lot of people. Plus, then there's also your, you know, there's also Jun, who we also had to voice as well. So yeah, there's like a ton of stuff going on there. But yeah, I mean, it was just really hard coming up with a league that sort of had met all those goals, especially because like we had the sort of time constraint of like, okay, we need something that we can actually do, because like we've got all these other leagues that we're putting back in, and we need to rebalance those and like do a bunch of stuff. So yeah, it was really tricky coming up with that.
To be
I
honest,
think everybody's happy about that.
Yeah.
Fighting masters.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, they hated the masters. We don't like
exactly.
them. Yeah, we want to kill them. Come on.
I was going to say,
Exactly.
your announcement trailer should have just been a 5-minute video of us, like, beating Elrond with his own relics or something. People would have been in for that.
Right. And I believe there's some interesting voice acting sort of callbacks to those kinds of things. Yeah.
I'm really happy that you were like, yeah, Nemesis system, because I think that's probably one of the coolest, like, big mechanics to come out in a while that I've been surprised more games haven't incorporated.
Right. It's actually really tricky when you break it down to incorporate something like that, because it sort of relies on you being able to both fail and succeed as a player in order to kind of like have the sort of notion of the enemies kind of getting better and so on. Like, and also just in general, like, having enemy, like, you have to have an excuse to be able to like basically revisit an enemy and then talk to them again and again in order for it to make sense. So that's where the sort of the Immortal Syndicate concept came from, that we had to have a way. I mean, okay, we can't in Path of Exile rely on you dying. That's like not really a mechanic that's going to fly. So therefore, we had to have a way that was like you can kill them, but they still get to come back. And so that's kind of where the storyline kind of came from, was from that sort of gameplay loop that you have to have in order to make a system like this work. So yeah, that was sort of the tricky thing. Yeah.
Actually, that raised an interesting question. How often do you get, oh, this is a really cool idea, but then you're like, hang on, we need to balance this around hardcore players? Because there must have been a few times you've had that,
So I personally am not actually very fussed about hardcore players. I personally have the attitude of hardcore players just need to deal. However,
that's good.
Thankfully, there are other people on the team who don't feel quite the same way, and they sort of moderate that a little bit. But yeah, personally, I'm of that opinion of just like personally, I think it would be nice if people have the feeling of like maybe I'm not going to have my first character play in hardcore just so I can actually learn the mechanics and like realize what I need to avoid and that kind of stuff. But yeah, as I said, like different people feel differently, so there's other people on the team who moderate that somewhat.
A lot of people come over to Path of Exile thinking that they can just steamroll it. It's like, oh yeah, I played hardcore in like some game 10 years ago. I'm totally fine. No, you just don't do it.
But I mean,
so I think it's the better approach. And I think most hardcore players, to be honest, appreciate it because it's just one of those things where it's just, yeah, just deal with it. You want to do this? Then really do it.
Right. Yeah.
Especially with like beasts being added back in. People who didn't play are going to get a bit of a shock when a red beast turns the corner.
Right, right.
Red beast plus assassin attack is going to be good.
So you actually might get a little bit of more warning of that because the way that works is that Einhar will kind of like portal in right as you're getting close to where beasts are. So you'll kind of get a little bit of heads up of the fact that there's going to be beasts here, and then he will do all the beast capturing. So you basically fight them till they would otherwise die, and then he throws the net and captures them. So there's no like having to worry about like managing nets or anything like that. And then basically once he also fights, by the way, he's got like a crossbow and he like can attack and do things, kind of like how Alva did in Incursion. And then once it's actually kind of like a mercenary, I guess, is sort of starting to get closer to that kind of system. But then once all the beasts are gone, then he'll chill, and you can talk to him, and then he'll bugger off again. So that's basically how the sort of flow of that works.
So could you build just one thing? Could you build an aura bot to buff him, and he could kill the beast for you?
I actually don't know about that. Yeah, like once again, I didn't actually implement that system, but that's kind of how it works from a game perspective. I haven't sort of deeply looked into it, but yeah, that's kind of the basic fundamentals of it. And we also simplified the crafting down a lot because people really didn't like the way that. So the problem with the old crafting thing in Beastery was that you would use some beasts and then you wouldn't realize you were accidentally screwing yourself with regard to another recipe you were intending to do. So what we basically did is simplify that down a lot so that each red beast you get has like one recipe that is used for, and then the rest just fill up with arbitrary yellows, and so that don't matter which yellows they are. So effectively, the red beast is the recipe, and then that way, like you can sort of easily understand what recipes you have, and then you just have to make sure you've got enough yellow beasts as well to fill up the slots.
Perfect.
And it just sort of simplifies it down a lot, and just means you don't have those annoying issues. And also it makes it a lot more clear about what recipes you can effectively do, because you can just filter by like what red beast do I have, and then that's exactly the list of recipes you can do. So it just makes a lot of things a lot easier.
And since we're auto capturing every beast, there's no longer a limit on how many we can have, right? Since we can't decide
actually,
not to
right?
capture one.
Actually,
I hope so.
Jonathan, right? Please.
Yeah, I actually need to go fix that because right now on the testing realm it does have a limit, and that's like an oversight that I do need to actually fix. But yes, I need to sort that out. And yeah, there won't be a limit when I'm done. I mean, there might be like some really big account limit, just for database size reasons. We have to have some, we have to have some limits in place for this kind of stuff. And get through. But yeah, I mean, ideally, you should never notice, and it certainly wouldn't be a per beast limit.
Does the menagerie still exist, or is there like another storage system?
So it does still exist. I mean, you can still open the like list view, which is what you usually use. The menagerie ended up kind of not being as useful as we had hoped. It's still going to be there, but like it doesn't really serve a huge purpose right now. And I feel like maybe later in a future expansion we could think about having a better reason for that to exist. Yeah, so that's like something that I would like to probably use in the future, since there's quite a bit of work put into the art for that. So like it'd be good to use it for something cool.
I think that was like one of the biggest like question marks for me when that didn't go core, because I was like, you spent so much money making all these zones and everything, and then it was like,
well, I mean, you'd be surprised how much content reuse there is, though. Like, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, I mean, technically, we'd like, but it was more like, it wasn't really so much like making much actual art. It was more like assembling it out of all the bits that we had. So, like, I mean, they had to make a few things. Like, I think those cages were like kind of not anywhere. There's like a few other bits and bobs that we kind of, But then once again, like any art like that we make, it's not like that goes to waste either, because that stuff kind of goes into a library of stuff that then just gets used on whatever random maps we're making. Like all that stuff just goes into the stable. So, we're pretty efficient with regard to art. Like, nothing is wasted. Like, you'd be surprised how many times we can find, we find a place to use something. Even if you only like see it once for what it was originally created, it still comes back in some form in some random other corner of the game.
I mean, I think you see that with players as well, right? Because they have their, they'll make their hideouts, and you'll see a new video of a new hideout, and you're like, how did he make that? And it's essentially just reusing the same art over and over and over again in a new way. So I can see that.
We should, we should actually, now I'm just thinking about this now, we should probably like reach out to people who have like the best hideouts and like talk to them to becoming level designers. It's like it's exactly the skill set that we need for level design. Just taking those existing art assets and smashing them together in different ways.
You need to hit up my boy Derek. He genuinely messages me about 10 times a day. Like, look, if you put 5 of these chairs together, it makes a flower. Like, it's all he does.
Right. Well, we're always hiring. Like, if people can migrate to New Zealand, I'm sure that someone will interview whoever it is.
Nice.
Since we're sort of starting to branch into more like general things, does anyone else have anything like betrayal related they want to talk about now before we go into like more general PoE stuff?
I'm surprised you stopped smiling so early, Tarke, with that mercenary reference. I was like, you're definitely gonna get hung up on that. You have no idea how happy you probably made him, Jonathan.
There have been like a lot of things in this league that I've been like saying I wanted or called, and it's just gonna be like.
I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so.
There's only like just one thing I had like on my mind. I don't know if you actually answered it, but is it intended to scale up the same way as like Elder with white, yellow, or red, like to that difficulty? Like, will that difficulty pertain throughout?
I would hope so, though. Once again, it's kind of not my area. Really, the person to ask is Mark II. Like, he's really in like so. Mark II is basically the man in charge of boss balance. Like, he does that stuff. Like, like if you need a boss made, he does the entire end-to-end process. So yeah, he will tell you that. But yes, ideally, our league content can always scale as far as we need it to go. And we usually, although I don't know exactly what the situation is here, we usually try to have rewards that are only available towards the upper end of levels that they can generate in as well. So yeah, that's also important.
Oh, actually, one other thing before we move away from league questions. Since you like plan this as like a multi-league thing, was that what you were kind of hoping to do with Harvey, or is that something you're ever going to like maybe go back to? Since at the time it seemed like it was going to go somewhere.
Harbinger was not in this sequence. We still intend to go back to Harbinger. Like there was intended to be a sequel league to that. But when we it was after that when we developed the plan to need to have this kind of like arc of leagues that have basically the NPCs that are going to be masters, whereas Harbinger doesn't really have anything like that. So we still plan to revisit the Harbinger stuff. We actually with a few times in other leagues like could we use this as an opportunity to have a Harbinger thing, but yeah, we just haven't had quite the right moment yet.
So you've just confirmed the league after this is Harvey related, then? Yeah.
I'm not going to confirm that at all. One day we'll get back to it. Nice. We've got a lot of there's a lot of leagues we need to make. So we
not
can go back to
but it's happening.
It's good to hear.
Nice. Like, we all agree that's confirmed, chat. Okay, so to get you off the cuff a little bit, so going to more like technical things, and this is like a really good example to have you on. So are there any things from like really early PoE which at the time was like, yep, we're coding it this way, which now you're like, oh my god, that was the worst thing in the world. Whenever we make new stuff, it's this one problem.
So I mean that happens all the time, and when it happens, we just change it. Like seriously, like we were like, since we're in this for the long haul, we really have no excuse. Like the sooner we fix something, the sooner it is going to be fixed for us to enjoy going forward. So we really just try and fix everything. I mean, that being said, there are a lot of times like, so there's this judgment call to make when you're programming, basically, of like, okay, is this actually bad, like to the point where you need to really change it, or is this just me not liking it because it's old and like it's actually fine and like, you know, I should just deal with it and forge on and make the changes I need to make and, you know, and whatever. So you always have to make that decision, and that is when people should be coming to me as the technical director to ask my opinion about it, because, you know, like what we really don't want is people just kind of spending all their time rewriting stuff, which is what, honestly, if you get a bunch of programmers and you don't give them any issues, they'll just sit there rewriting things. Like you really have to, you know, like, because they want to make everything perfect, right? Like that's the thing a programmer wants to do. So that means that, like, and you do want some of that. Like you need some like just time for programmers to like not actually have anything that they need to be doing urgently, so they can kind of rewrite stuff and make it better. But if they have too much of that, then they'll just sit there doing that all the time and not actually make any content. So you kind of need to like balance that knife edge in order to get things actually done. So yeah, as I said, we try and like basically go back and do stuff. And so there's actually been, okay, like I'm just going to give you a random example, and I actually don't remember whether this is already in 3.4.0 or whether this is in 3.5.0. I think it actually is already in 3.4.0. And so this is something you may not have actually even noticed. But it used to be that when you fired an arrow at a wall, okay, you fire an arrow at a wall and it sticks in, right? And the distance from the wall it hit was kind of a bit random. Like sometimes it would stick in like kind of obviously far away from the wall, and sometimes it would actually stick in the wall properly. And like there's a little bit of the problem of like it's just markup, right? Like sloppy markup on some tiles that causes that. But actually, if you just sit there and just fire an arrow at the wall in exactly the same place again and again, you'll notice that the arrow actually sticks like out of the wall quite often, like quite far back. And it turns out that wasn't only a problem in walls; it was also a problem with actual monsters. Like when you fired a like fireball or something, sometimes it would explode like before the monster, and it just looked wonky, and it made the combat feel worse. Like especially in early game when everything's kind of moving slower, and you kind of got more time to notice that stuff. And this is actually kind of like this like weird issue to do with collision detection and like the order in the frame when things happen. Like, you know, the collision was happening like at a different point, and like one thing versus the other, and it's kind of complicated. Well, that's the kind of stuff that's like really fundamental to the game. It's like really easy to get used to and not even notice anymore, until one day it's like, okay, surely this can't be that hard to fix. Like, why have I been living with this for like years and years and years? Like, I really should actually find out like what is even causing that. Like, that's weird. Like, now that I think about it, why would I fire an arrow twice and get different results? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So like that's the kind of thing where you really have to like, it actually takes a little bit of effort to like take stock and like step back and actually realize like there's actually a problem here, and like this problem is probably not just causing like arrows to stick at different places and walls, but actually causing like, you know, the gameplay to just feel worse in general, kind of everywhere. So that's the kind of thing that you know, it's an example of a thing we fixed. I think it was in 4.0, but as I said, it might be 3.5.0. And you know, like that's the kind of stuff we really have to go back. And so there's kind of other things like in the early game as well that I'd really like to try and just do to fix to improve combat feel. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is stuff that is to do with actually the rigs on the animations. And so we've had like a multi-year long process of like making new character models with new rigs, and that's going to come in 4.0. So like, you know, that's the point where we're going to get new character rigs. And things are going to improve a lot when that happens, because the animation's just going to like, you know, like the animators, every time they have to go back to the old rigs, it's like they absolutely hate it, because like those old, I mean, like, okay, so like you're making an RPG, right? The first thing you make are the character classes, and like that's literally the first thing you made in 2006. I mean, you know, we're talking about stuff that's like more than a decade old now.
How long did the animators have to spend making like the female marauder and stuff?
Yeah, I'm not going to ask that question. What I will tell you, though, what I will say though, is that one nice thing about the way we're doing the rigging now, going forward, is that we're making the rigs like the technology improved a lot since 2006 when we started. So now it's way easier to share rigs between different characters, and that means that like we don't make like, you know, a marauder rig. We make like large male rig, and then we can make like a medium female rig and whatever, and then we can have like different rigs for just like for genders and character size, And then those are kind of generic so that we can then reuse those rigs. I mean, obviously the animations have to change, so we want specific animations for our character classes, and we want like a bunch of stuff like that to make it have a lot of personality. But it just really helps a lot when you can share the rigs between a bunch of characters. So it's interesting, like the tech, like we're using the new rigs for our character classes in 4.0 and like new monsters that we're making now. So like all the boss, like the humanoid bosses, they actually use the modern rigs, which is why the animations on the new bosses are like better than the animations on our main characters, which is kind of unfortunate. But like, you know, yeah, like one day all of this will be sorted out and like everything will be better, and the animators are like so looking forward to trashing those old rigs. So yeah, that's a example of a thing that, yeah, but I was like, the thing to realize about though is when you make new rigs, you have to redo every armor in the game to re-rig them to those rigs. And so this is why it's just a mammoth task, which is why we're literally doing it over years. You know, like we hired, like there are like people at our company whose job entirely it is to just re-rig armors all day, every day for years, for doing in order to make it so that we can have new rigs for 4.0. So you know, yeah, it's like a huge thing, and then that's going to make the animation feel way better, especially early game. But I'd really like to just revisit those combat fundamentals as well. You know, like I really want to make sure. So I mean, there's questions about like yeah, just so like exactly, you know, the feeling of like hitting something, just like getting that way better. It's something that I really want to work on in coming expansions, you know, over time, and make sure that we get that better. So yeah, so this question was about like things that are like technical limitations, and like yeah, there really isn't anything that I don't want to fix. Like, you know, there's certainly nothing that I would look at and be like, yeah, I'm never going to fix that. Like anything that is a problem, I want to fix eventually. It's just a question of priorities, right? Of just getting the priorities in order, making sure that
and everything becomes a problem at some point.
Right, exactly. I mean, like there's an issue class in our issue tracker called unscheduled, and then in brackets worth doing, which is like for all the stuff I really want to do one day. This is as opposed to unscheduled don't do, which is like stuff that's like really pointless. So yeah, and all the stuff in there one day. You know, maybe 10 years from now, one day I will get to it.
10 years? Oh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, we've got to keep
I like the sound of that.
This train roll. We've got to keep this train rolling, you know? Yeah.
We agree, for sure.
So just quickly to backtrack a little bit, so does that mean that whenever you make like a new MTX set, are the animators like already trying to like rig it for the new skeletons as well?
I actually don't know about that. It would sort of make sense for that to be happening, so I would imagine they're doing that, but I actually don't know. Yeah, maybe they are. It would sort of make sense.
That's cool. So sort of going to like really old school like Foundation stuff, I think something which comes up a lot is the whole thing with like loot generation. Like sometimes you like crash when you show the filters and stuff.
You know, actually, you know, okay, so this is actually an area that's really hard. It's really hard to fix. And we actually thought we were going to do that for Xbox when we released Xbox. We thought, okay, for console, it's going to be really important to lower the amount of loot. And in the end, when we actually went to do it, what we found was that there's so much subtlety in the loot tables that's really hard. Because the thing is, okay, ideally what you want, right, is you want the game to like effectively filter all the items I will never want and only drop the ones I do, but while still giving me all the value that I would have had before, right? That's like ideally what it would do, right? But the problem is when you actually come to try and do that, what you find is like, okay, there's all sorts of weird things where you're going to hurt somebody if you know, because like people have all sorts of items that they want, and it's actually really like it's like the meta is involved and like knowing like, okay, so this is like this is like 2014 or something. But like there was, you know, like thicket bows were like a thing at some point in the past, and it's like that was the thing where it's like that's not the highest bow, and yet somehow that's like the most valuable one that people want to craft, and like, you know, that kind of stuff. So like there's things like that where it's like it's actually really hard to do a full like balance pass on items without like failing to miss like something that's important. And so, yeah, I honestly, like, I'd love for there to be less items that drop. Like, I really would. And like, it's got to happen at some point. Like, we can't continue with this forever. But yeah, it's just going to take a huge amount of effort from somebody. And unfortunately, it just hasn't been the highest on priority. And like, you know, the loot builders did like help a lot with like reducing that stuff. But obviously, it's kind of a bit ridiculous that like you have to have like a third-party item filter effectively to be able to like, you know. So yeah, it's something we have to deal with at some point. And yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
The one thing I really love about that is the one time you eventually get to it, like 27 years from now, someone's going to be complaining that you broke that animate weapon build. They're like, you destroyed it.
Well, that's the thing. That's exactly the thing, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like, there's stuff like that is that's the reason why it's difficult.
Animate weapon has been just such a problem child for various different league mechanics.
Yes, well, it's because I mean, we really liked this thing of like trying to drop items after, like, especially when you've got like timed events and stuff like that, where you have to like really concentrate on combat. So having this thing where the items drop at the end has been like quite beneficial. And yet, yeah, suddenly it's like animate weapon players, and at some point, okay, it's like this came up in Delve. It's like, okay, like we're dropping items only when you get to the end, and like animate weapon pales are boned, and I'm just like, oh my god, like animate weapon again. I mean,
that's my point. Yeah.
It's like okay, and then there people start coming up with ideas of like, oh, if you've got animate weapon equipped, should it be different? I'm like, no, that's terrible. Like, come on, like you start to come up with these like things to paper over the problem, and yeah, it's like it's a red-headed stepchild of like item dropping problems.
Who in the office made that skill out of interest?
God, I don't remember.
Did they get fired? Are they not there anymore?
No. I mean, I think it might have even been me. I honestly don't remember. Like, it's one of those things. Like, it sounds cool, right? Like, it sounds cool. Like, hey, what if you could turn all the weapons on the ground into something? Like so. Yeah. And stuff that sounds cool, we like to try and do. So, yeah. I don't regret it, even though it's kind of causes some pain. Maybe we'll find some way to totally refactor it into something different someday. Yeah, I don't know.
But isn't it one thing? Are you not okay with having with there being a skill like animate weapon that is just so unique in its design that it kind of conflicts with some of the other game design?
It's only a problem when, like, okay, the problem is though, if you're going to have a skill like that, then some people are going to want to be able to use it, and unfortunately, if the leagues don't let you use it, it's like effectively not a usable skill. So at that point, it's like, why is it even in the game? So like that's the problem,
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it should be the case that every skill should be at least possible to use in whatever content you want to try and tackle. Even if it may not be the most effective thing, at least you should be able to use it. You know what I mean?
I mean, you can always just bring in a ton of weapons in your inventory.
I suppose you could, but I mean, I doubt animated weapon players are hearing that and thinking that sounds like a good solution. So,
I mean, there's chains of command is basically what you use if you want to play a weapon build.
Yeah. So I mean, there's stuff like that you can use to help. Yeah. Anyway, we don't want to make this animated weapon cast. So.
No.
Uber, as much as Uber Elite would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay then. So one question which really interests me is, are there any systems in the game which like the devs all agree is terrible, but they're only there because people like Uber want them, animate weapon, or because of some technical issue?
I mean, I'm sure there are, but like we actually do try as much as possible to change things up. Like, I mean, there are things that like we know. I mean, So, there are things we know are bad that we want to change, like, for example, removing the Forsaken Masters. But in terms of, like, things that the players really want to have to keep around, I honestly don't know.
Well, like, for example, on a podcast you did ages ago, Lionel's Watch, you said that you personally would love to, like, cut attack and cast speed in half. Stuff like that.
Yes. That's the thing. That is true. Okay, so that's the sort of so there's, like, stat inflation, right? So, I mean... so there's stuff like run speed and stuff like that, and like attack speed. Yeah, you really can't lower those. Or if you're going to lower them, you really have to lower them very slowly. Like you could maybe lower it like 5% per expansion or something, and then like boil the frog in the pot kind of thing like that. Maybe you could do that over time. I don't actually think we're really going to do that. But that's the kind of thing. Like those sudden gameplay changes would really piss the players off. There's an example of another action RPG that did something like that. And the player base really hated them afterwards. Like when you change those like basic how fast I feel like I'm attacking and running, it's bad news. So yeah, I suppose that kind of is one of those things. But it's honestly no, it wasn't. That's not the game. They're honestly those things actually more are kind of about like it kind of looks stupid, right? Like like it looks really dumb.
Yeah, I
have something that.
Sorry, I was about to ask like whether or not that's more from a technical standpoint that you want things slowed down to make it easier to implement like crazy skills. That would be horrible at 20 attacks per second.
The other thing is that it actually hurts server-side performance. And there's actually this annoying thing where the cost per player to run the backend has increased over the years like 3 or 4 times. just due to the amount of so it used to be that we could get 1,800 game servers on a single physical machine. And these days, I believe, I mean, we actually do like optimization passes on this, so I don't know where it's currently at, but it's gone as low as like 500 or 600, which you compare to 1,800 is like, and then I believe we might be like 800 or something like that at the moment. So I guess that's only actually like half as good as it was before. But there's like various other factors. But yeah, that actually, I mean, the interesting thing about that is it like directly correlates to just like money, right? Like if it costs like however many amount of money it costs per year, if you double that, like, that's like just straight up money out of the pocket. But then it's interesting though, because it's one of those things where it's like prioritizing that over like content. It's like, okay, like, yeah, server costs are high, but like we'd rather make more content and get more players than like lower our server costs. So it sort of ends up being one of those things that's like, yeah, you're like, someone could spend like a week and maybe like cut like, 50K off our server budget per year. And that's like theoretically like super important. We should do that. But then when it comes to like or they could like make the client faster and like actually have all the players like enjoy that, or make make more content. So it's kind of one of those trade-offs that's like seems weird that we wouldn't prioritize given how much money it costs, and yet somehow it still manages to be lower on the priority list than.
Have you considered putting a like numbered value on like multi-strike? So when people go to quit multi-strike, it says warning: this will cost our servers this much money.
I really don't want to compromise gameplay. It was actually interesting because very few games have this thing where you can have unrestricted kind of spam, if you know what I mean. Like our game is kind of somewhat unique in that like most people, whenever they make a system like that, they put limiters in place. So like, the most you could ever cast, like the most projectiles you could ever have on the screen is this, or the most like monster like bodies you could ever have on screen is that, or whatever. Like they'll put all these limits in place. But I actually really don't like doing that because I think it's kind of like it just kind of feels I really hate artificially restricting the player like that. And so kind of the opposite end of that, of course, is that like the game obviously can run slowly in cases where you're just like doing absolutely ridiculous things. I mean, we've like pushed the boundaries. Like I honestly think that like few other engines would be able to run what we do at the speeds that we run it at, especially with regard to like, I don't know if you like remember the patch where we improved, where we changed the way we did, I mean, you wouldn't have understood what exactly we were doing, but we changed the way we were doing draw core culling to make it so that like suddenly like when you had like the crazy build of what's it called, the one which explodes with the charges, I can't remember, discharge. There was like the discharge builds that would literally get your client down to like less than 1 FPS, and then like suddenly you actually maintain like 15 FPS doing that, and like that patch there, like the stuff that we can do now, like it's really quite ridiculous. So it actually makes me a little bit sad when people say, "Oh, your engine is so slow and crappy," and it's like, okay, well, like honestly, it's actually not. Like we've actually optimized it like very well, especially in 3.4.0. Actually, we removed like pretty much all stuttering. That was the thing where we finally made it so that literally everything you can encounter in the world can be done asynchronously without having to block, which means that you'd never get stutter anymore. The very final thing was shaders, which in the past, as you walked in new areas, you get little micro stutters. They were like less than a frame in size, but they just push you just over. So you'd go from 60 FPS to 30 FPS for like 1 frame and then back, and it's just those little micro stutters. And so, like, just as you're walking around, that doesn't happen anymore. And but it is still possible, right? It's still possible to get the game client to slow down, and that is because once again we just have this unrestricted spam. That's and it's kind of like I really don't want to compromise that, like I really want, like, we should be able to make, like, that's the gameplay I want to provide, so we should be able to make the engine capable of that. But it does get very hard when you're talking about hundreds of projectiles and like so many creating things on the screen. So we have resorted to balance measures, like for example with what's it called, Molten Strike. We changed it so that as your attack speed increases, it also increases the speed at which the projectiles like jump and like fall. And what that did was it meant that there were less of those on screen at a time, and that actually lowers the amount of spam without actually lowering the amount of projectiles that hit per second. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like there are like clever things you can do that kind of fix problems, but they're kind of on a per skill basis, and so it kind of requires a bit of, like that requires like targeted looking, like, okay, what are players doing currently that's the slowest thing, and then like targeting that. And honestly, what we probably should do is like add more telemetry to the game so we can actually understand that. Because right now we can technically get like stuff like frame rates. What we don't have is a correlation of that with like gameplay of like, okay, what skill were they using for most of the time in this instance, and like that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff we would really like to be able to have in order to be able to like be able to do more targeted like frame rate things. Because right now we're really sort of relying on QA to just know like what is the thing that players are complaining about in terms of performance, stuff like that, in order to address those specific things. But yeah, as I said, ideally, I just want to make everything fast. So sorry to, I've been ranting for quite a long time now without any of you talking. So yeah,
this is basically how Baeclast works.
It's fine.
It means we're not having to listen to Raiz as much. So I think everyone is very happy.
I was gonna make the same joke about you. This is so
I am really curious, actually.
rigged.
As to whether...
On this note, though.
Go ahead, Nugi.
Okay, on this note, is this one of the reasons why you had to change something like cast and crit back in the day? Because that's like an old love child of a lot of people. Like, was that the server cost, or was it the power?
Well, okay. It's so first of all, I should say it's never the cost on the server side. Like I never balance something to optimize server cost. What we do have to optimize though is that we can't, if something on the server takes more than 33 milliseconds. Which is 30 FPS, then that you'll start to, if you're in lockstep, then the game will freeze, and that isn't your client failing to render something. That is the game simulation stopping because the server is lagging. And this is actually another thing that I actually really want to make sure people understand is that sometimes when people are saying like, oh, your engine is bad, what they're really complaining about is the servers, because, or rather I should say the server software, because when you have a lot of stuff on screen, sometimes it's not the GPU that's lagging, it's the server trying to process stuff. And so there were changes we made to that really helped a lot recently. So like I think it might have been 3.4 as well, although it might have been 3.3. We actually made the change so that when an item drops, it doesn't actually generate the mods on the item until after you pick it up. And that is a change because I mean there is literally no way to know what the mods would have been on the item while it's on the ground. And that's the kind of thing that actually like increased server performance quite a lot. So they were actually used to get like big lag spikes when you're killing bosses, and maybe people don't notice when this stuff goes away for some reason. Like we put like a huge amount of effort into like fixing this stuff, and then people don't really notice it, which sounds like I'm bitter, but I really shouldn't be because I don't really blame the players. But yeah, I mean, like for example, it used to be like you get huge lag spikes when you kill bosses, and that was literally just generating items, and there was no reason for it because like how many items do you actually pick up? Like not that many, right? So you might as well just generate the mods when you pick the item up rather than when it drops. And that's the kind of thing that we can do. And so once again, that wasn't about saving server costs, although it did make things technically for us slightly cheaper. It's about reducing the maximum length that a frame can take on the server so that the gameplay experience is never compromised on the client side. And yeah, that's the tricky part. So I really, this server performance thing, I would actually say for the most part that client side performance is actually in a pretty damn good place right now. So actually the next big bugbear is actually server-side performance. And I think that people mistake it, but the way that you can tell is when you get lag spikes, where you see things that are animated like on the GPU are still animating. So like for example, I mean you see it when you actually get like a lag spike for real, like when your internet's screwing up, like you see like how you might have like a fireball and like it's still like kind of like wobbling around and like kind of moving a little bit. Or whatever. I guess you don't actually use Fireball, so you know. I guess it's not
basically the shaper animation. If you get the shaper animation, but outside of
actually,
shaper,
that is exactly what that is. You know, I'll tell you what. You know, the way that's implemented is actually by effectively simulating a lag spike. We literally just stop the simulation and just stop sending packets, and that's effectively what happened. So yeah, that's so exactly the shaper animation. So yeah, but if you see that for like if you get like a 60 millisecond server side long frame, that sort of all you really see is that judder in the frame rate, and you don't really appreciate the fact that was a server side thing as opposed to a client side thing. So yeah, that's unfortunate. And so what I actually should have done this years ago. What I should do is add an icon that pops up. Like Quake 3 used to have back in the day. There's that little icon that pops up.
Yeah.
I'm obviously way too old. I'm like way too old. But, yeah, like it had this little picture of a network jack that's unplugged. That's like effectively when you've stopped getting telemetry from the server. So what I should do is if I had that in the corner, you would notice that flickering when you were getting this kind of problem, and that would mean you'd be able to tell the difference between your client being slow and the server being slow. And I think that would maybe make people understand a little bit of what's going on. So yeah, I actually like at one point like wrote this giant rant about this that I was going to publish as a manifesto, but in the end it kind of didn't really sound right, and like I felt like I was blaming the players because I really don't want to. Like obviously it's not unreasonable for players to feel, to not understand the technical difference between like because there's like several things here, like like especially in the past where we had like all these problems also with disk. So we used to have problems where the disk couldn't catch up, and like especially on platter-based hard drives. So you'd be running along, and then you'd get like a lock, and what that was actually trying to access something on the disk, and that's on us because we didn't preload that correctly. But that's the kind of example of a problem that was like, and that was that as opposed to like frame rate, as opposed to server-side lag. There's like all these different things, right? And so yeah, that's obviously I shouldn't expect the players to understand the differences, but I probably should add, and I probably should have done this years ago, add some icons that say, which one of those it is, so you can kind of at least know, like, even so if you're complaining about something, you at least know what to report. Like that would be even helpful, so that we can understand that kind of stuff. So yeah. Anyway, once again, I'm ranting for ages about this.
No, it's literally every Baeclast. It's fine.
Just real quick before we jump off the topic, if you guys want to simulate this, just find a really big Allies Cannot Die pack. And on that note, Jonathan,
right?
Why is Allies Cannot Die still in the game?
At least they got rid of the double Allies Cannot Die. That no longer they no longer affect one another.
Okay, so you're saying like performance gets bad when you attack an Allies Cannot Die pack?
Yeah.
So we actually made that quite a bit better. But okay, so there's an upcoming performance thing which we haven't actually started implementing yet. But like, okay, I need to really get it. So the reason why Allies Cannot Die is bad is actually not because Allies Cannot Die is slow, like you might think. It's actually because literally monsters don't die. So therefore, when you like all the damage that you're dealing to them, like is actually like you're actually doing more damage packages. They're called damage packages internally. Like when you like a hit on something, it's called a damage package. Like you're doing like way more damage packages. They have to go like be processed than a normal thing. So like, okay, so you guys may not realize. So there are like 9,000 stats in the game, right? Like that's literally the number of them. There are 9,000 of them in the backend, and like a pretty large percentage of them stats that are to do with when you hit something happens. And so right now, the way that works, and this is going to sound dumb, but was absolutely fine for a really long time, is like, okay, do we have this stat? Do we have that stat? Do we have this stat? Do we have that stat? That's literally what happens every time one of those damage packages happens on the server, right? So what really should happen is we should make a list of like, I'm going to say function pointers, even though like that probably doesn't mean much to you, of like of things that like need to happen when you get hit or when you hit something. And then basically only process the things we know you actually have the stats for. Because like most stats are just like random uniques that you don't have equipped. And like there's very few of them. Like even though there might be like tons of stats that could apply to a given combat situation, the vast majority of them don't actually apply to a given combat situation. So like so I mean this thing that we're doing here is effectively like find the like 3 applicable things out of the like several thousand things that could actually apply here. And that is actually quite slow. So basically what I need to do is make it so that these damage packages, or just hits, you might want to call them, are way faster to process. And when we do that, that's going to make that situation be way faster. And like that issue has been sitting as a high priority issue for every expansion for Mark 1 for the last 4 expansions.
Wow.
And it's just kind of like a really big job to tackle, and like maybe this one, maybe the next one will be the one he does it. But yeah, I really want that to happen. And like and once again, and as to your question of why we haven't just removed it from the game, it's because when you know that something is going to be fixed one day,
right,
then you really don't want to take it out, because the problem is if we take that out, right, even if we fix the performance problem later, players are still going to complain when we put it back in again. So what I'm saying is that, that we don't want to set the precedent of removing it. That's kind of why it's in this annoying position where it's like, okay, yeah, it really it really sucks, because like it sucks that it's there and it causes these performance problems. But like it's like every expansion we go into it being like, we're going to totally fix this expansion. It's going to happen this time, and yet when we get to the end of it, it's like, okay, no, we didn't actually get time for that. So yeah, this is like the annoying.
No, you really did get to a lot of those like AoE type of effects, like even Reflect in the past, hitting just a bunch of Reflect stuff, or Thorns. That was really, you could really tell that there's just more going on and it would be bad. Yeah, like Alex Gonna Die has been.
So we'll get to it. I promise we will fix the performance of Allies Cannot Die. It will happen. I just don't know when, honestly. Like I really hope. Once again, we'll go into the next expansion fully intending to get that done, and I really hope we can this time. So, I mean, we're really pushing to hire some more gameplay programmers so that our more senior guys who would do that sort of stuff are able to get more time to do that kind of thing. So, you know, that's something that we're actively looking for.
Did you ever fix the lag you were having when the map mod, like, monsters gain charges every second or something, every couple of seconds, and that was, like, lagging everyone out? Is that still I can't actually remember.
No, it was fixed.
So the problem
Yeah,
with that,
I mean,
I believe it was, but I don't remember which fix it was that did it, or if it's actually truly fixed. Because, okay, so the problem with that was that adding buffs was slow. And I actually, you know what? I actually think we did fix that. So we had a thing that made what we call virtual stats get way faster. I think it was 3.3.0. And that one was a big cause of lag what you would get when adding any kind of debuff to a monster. It was actually a huge amount of performance was spent doing this because there's so many debuffs that are just put on as a matter of course. Like you attack someone and they get like chilled and poison and blah 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 blah. And so there was like tons of debuffs going on. And so ignite, of course, is another big one. So there's like a ton of those debuffs that are going on all the time. And when that happens, it's like we have to. So I mean, the way that stats work in PoE is we have these things called virtual stats. And the idea is like, okay, so imagine like something like life. So life is like a value that you have, but there's like a bajillion things that contribute to life. And we don't really want to have to query all of those when we're saying, what's your maximum life? We just want to know, like, okay, what is the result of all of that? So what we do is whenever something changes, like you get some particular like life when you're walking at a speed of a snail, or life when you're like doing some particular thing on a Tuesday, and we get all of that and we basically say, is it Tuesday? If it is, then the life is good now, and then when it changes over to be Wednesday, then we subtract it, and that means that that will mean that basically we only calculate those things when things change. But effectively, when buffs go on someone, it changes some stats, and those things were at the bottom of a really huge tower of things that change. Like you put a bit of fire damage, and there's like a bajillion stats related to you taking fire damage. That means that when you put burning on, it changes a lot of stuff. So basically, we were able to optimize that process of recalculating those stats like a really huge amount, and that improved not just combat actually a large amount, just reducing those lags that you would get from attacking large packs of monsters, but also situations like adding large amounts of frenzy charges and other stuff like that. It just improved that stuff a lot. But there's still probably more we could do there. We could still probably increase the speed of that even more. It did improve a lot.
One quick question, and this is mostly just because I'm an idiot. How much of your job, like your time, is wasted trying to explain mechanics if you don't know like anything about how anything works?
He doesn't talk to you that often, Tarke.
A few hours on a podcast every few months.
If you ask, I'm sure quite a lot of Mark's time is wasted doing that.
Whoa, shots fired.
He likes to post on the forums a lot about those deep little questions that matter. But I mean, I am spending a huge portion of my day explaining things to people, and once again, that's just because that's part of effectively my job is of knowing how things work. People basically come into my office all the time and asking, how does this thing work? And even if I don't want to explain it to them, I can usually point them to the person who does know, because I know who did it in the first place. So that's kind of a big part of that.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of just one of the things which comes with getting like the larger team. So like on the one hand, you're like, yay, we've got a massive company, but now you're like, no, I need to explain more things.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, the thing that sucks about getting bigger is that the bigger your company gets, the less efficient it is. Like to a degree that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. It's like, I think that like, okay, so you're one guy, you're 100% efficient. You add another guy, just one more guy, and now each person is like 70% efficient. It's like you've already lost 30% of each person's like work just by adding one more person. And then as you add more people, it's like only gets worse and worse. And it's like at this point, at a company even of just 100 people, we're probably only like 20% efficient is what you would be working by yourself. But then it's like you've got a company that's like huge, that's got like like 1,000 people working on a game, and they're probably like 5% efficient or like 2% efficient or something like that per person. Like it's actually ridiculous, like just how much of your time is cost from just having to know who to talk to and like what all that stuff. So yeah, it's terrible, and I hate it. Every aspect of that. But on the other hand, if you want to add more, to get a more bigger team and like be able to make more stuff, you do have to do it. So yeah.
I actually think PoE players can relate to this very, very easily because all you need to do is you need to explain that whenever you add a new player into the group, you don't get 100% extra quantity on the
Yep,
on the
exactly.
map. It's the same thing, right?
Exactly. Yes. Exactly right.
I think
It's
the
the same
better
thing with this
analogy for that
podcast.
is like, oh, now your friend wants to vendor, and you're just sat there waiting for them to finish doing whatever they put the
Right,
next
right.
map in.
So yeah. Thankfully, I actually think that our company is relatively good at lowering the bureaucracy. I don't know how many years we can continue to feel that way. But we try to really lower the meetings, like have as few as possible, or making sure that if we're going to have a meeting, like everyone who's there wants to be there, basically, and like that it's actually effective. We don't do like big meetings with like as a matter of course of like big groups of 20 people and that kind of stuff. They're just useless, right? You like a meeting above like 3 people starts to become terrible. So yeah, we really try and lower that.
If you need to ever up those happy people statistics, you can just invite us and we'll be very happy to be
Very
there.
happy.
Right. Okay.
Need those stats up? We're cranking right up. It's the same thing also with this podcast, by the way. This is only why we let Tarke take care of everything, because we don't want that efficiency drop. That's why
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's why
he's
I do
the only one doing the
absolutely-
work.
Yeah, thank you,
Very good
Raiz. I appreciate that.
You're welcome, Tarke.
100% efficiency. So getting back to like actual PoE stuff, have you had any ideas where you're like, this is the best idea ever, but you're just like, we cannot put this in this game because we just don't have the technology for it?
We generally try to not let that stop us. There have certainly been times when programmers have been like, I really, really don't want to do that. But usually you can find a way if you're willing to just like reframe. I mean, there's certainly been things where it's like, okay, this isn't practical to do in its current form, but we can jiggle it around a bit and then get there. But yeah, I don't think there's any been straight up just hard nose on a technical ground before. Like we usually can do what we need to do. Yeah.
Did you have like any concern when you first made like obviously Bestry now with like Delve and stuff before you started like adding like extra keybinds with the leagues? Was that ever like a big worry?
Of just adding
Just
stuff.
adding this extra button kind of thing.
It's funny. We're actually running out of letters on the keyboard to have as default keys, which is really annoying. I think we realized recently, hey, like there are number keys here that we're technically not using because like only the flasks are only using the first like 5 of them. So like we can start using those maybe. But no, there's actually a concern. And then we started being like, okay, it's like V is the like league key. Like we're not going to start using different buttons for that anymore. And like there's things like it is annoying. Probably should like purge some of these at some point. I don't know, like to like get rid of some systems at some point. I mean, yeah, like I'm not really too worried about actually like number of systems from a gameplay perspective because like we tend to be fairly okay with removing things when they're not working anymore. But also when you push them late enough game, like you can just like rearrange things so that like they get introduced later, so you don't have to worry about them for quite a while. And that kind of reduces the cognitive load a little bit. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that side of it. Yeah, in terms of raw keys on the keyboard, that is actually a problem.
So we're not getting additional keybinds anytime soon then?
Well, so are you talking about like when you say keybinds, are you referring
like
to
actual like skill keys?
skills?
Yeah.
I had a plan for something like that recently. It's actually
Here we go.
Summoner in the world perks up.
Here we go.
I should probably talk to Chris about this before I talk about it.
If you want, you can talk to me about it, and I'll pass it.
Damn
I've got Chris's email. I can send it right now.
Yeah. He's actually at a Magic tournament right now, so he probably won't be responsive.
Or responsible either. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, or responsible.
It would probably be for the best for us, to be honest, in this case.
I was actually thinking on I was thinking on the on like an eternal part. You say that you have Mark sitting on the forums a lot, because I think for us more veteran players, we would really like to have a resource that's more available with like a lot of like in-game mechanics. Is that something you've ever thought about? And also on that note, is it something that could like internally where you have like, do you have something where you have like, if explaining things to each other internally, right? Where it's like, oh, you have like a more like collected resource.
So
internal Wikipedia.
We don't have an internal Wikipedia, and what I would like to say is that we rely on PoE Wiki to a surprising degree.
Wow.
Yeah, like I mean, the thing is that honestly, like, if you want to quickly work out something, or like or like the search, like searching Google for PoE wiki is actually a surprisingly good way to find it out.
This explains a lot. To be honest.
Fuck's sake, right?
In a good way.
Yeah.
Wikis.
Yeah, I
got a
mean, the thing
problem
is,
or two.
but on the other hand, okay, so like, I mean, there is documentation internally to some degree, like in the data. So like, for example, if you want to know how something works, you usually go to its implementation or just into the configurator or something like that. There's notes columns and things like that you can look at. So that's sort of important. What we don't, I actually prefer that in some respects because it means the documentation is right where you need it. You don't have to look it up somewhere else. On the other hand, the reason why PoE Wiki is useful is because we don't really have a search that's as good as Google for looking through that data, if you know what I mean. And that's why it's kind of useful when you need to find something like which you don't quite know what it is you're looking for. It's really, like, oh, what was the unique that did blah again or something like that? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of a hard question to answer from the kind of documentation that we have. So therefore, that's why PoE Wiki is useful. So it's really like looking up uniques or like, hey, what stat is this uniques on? Is like, you could answer that from the the data tool is called the config editor, which is a dumb name, but you could answer that from the config editor by looking up. But it's just easier to look it up on Google.
Why don't you just do what we do? Can you just ask Carve? Because that's what we do whenever we need something.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right.
PoEDB is a great website, by the way.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no, there's a bunch of there's a bunch of things like that. Although I mean, what the PoEDB is actually a bit more close to what our data tools are like, since effectively it does come from our data. So yeah, that's kind of more that website's actually more like what we do have internally. Yeah. So yeah, it's what was the question again? I don't even remember.
Well, also one of the things I was wondering, right? Because you have like Mark like writing on the forums.
Oh yeah,
that's
right.
I think it's really good that he is there
stuff,
because
yeah,
it gives
yeah,
you like
yeah.
a connection to the community
Right,
as
right,
well.
right.
But wouldn't it be easier as well also to just have?
Yeah, right. So in-game resources that have more of that stuff. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. The answer to that is we actually would love to do more in-game resources, and over time, I think that will happen. We're actually discussing, although it's not like I kind of don't know what a timeline for this is, but we'd actually really love to have more help with regard to for new players with regard to support gems and what support gems to use for a given skill and stuff like that. So what we actually really would love to do is have it so that like there's kind of like an in-game like I'm not going to say wiki because you can't edit it, but like an in-game sort of help system for individual skill gems. So when you click on one, it's like, okay, here's the gems, here's the support gems, like basically compulsory for the skill. Like you should definitely be using this. Here are some that are like the list of like ones that are good in terms of like what ones can be good, and then here's a few others that like work, but they're just like not really the best. And you should probably avoid them if you can get one of the other ones. You know what I mean? And then kind of have a little bit of documentation as to why they're good. Like that's kind of the other part I want to get to is like, okay, why is it that piercing is good for ice shot? I think it's ice shot. Is my saying the right skills?
Sure. Yeah, it's one of them.
Yeah, for example. And you're like, well, the reason is because it triggers every time it hits a monster, and so therefore you want to pierce multiple monsters so that you get the cone of damage effect multiple times. And like that's the kind of thing where it's like, I don't want to just say like this is good for this, and you should just blindly use it. I want to say like it's because for this reason, and kind of have some of that. And I'd really love to get some of that information in the game. And so it's just going to require a lot of data entry from people, and like but it's the kind of data entry where it's like the person has to know the game as well. And unfortunately, it's like anyone who knows the game well enough to know what the meta is for that sort of stuff probably also is like busy doing something to do with balance somewhere else. So it's like I need someone who's both completely useless with regard to actually working on the game, while also understanding the game well enough that they can actually write those kinds of documentation. So yeah,
I actually have
a
really a few really helpful suggestions for that. So I actually made an April Fool's video, which you definitely haven't seen, which was about you were going to add an NPC called Tarly's cat, who, when you got to Act 1, would follow you around, and it was a talking cat, which would like answer your questions about the build. You can have that for free. I'm happy to do the voice acting. But also, if that's too expensive, you could just put Carve on everyone's friends list by default, and whenever anyone has any question, you just ask Carve.
Oh, that's the tricky part, right? Do you really want him on a friends list though? Like, can a Carve be available at any point? Like, I would imagine that's the biggest problem. You don't really want this huge menu opening up when you just first started the game and throwing like a million pieces of information at you.
And that's kind of why we want to make it really contextual. So the thing, the primary way you would open that would be on the screen where you're picking a reward skill gem. is basically like that's the time when you want to click on that and like see a video of what it looks like to use, and then like have like the thing of what support gems should I use and so on. And then basically there'd probably be some kind of context thing on like the gem. It would be like, you know, click this button while hovering the gem to open up the window that explains about that gem. And basically the more that we can make context sensitive to do with you know, like so it's only kind of there when you need it, the better. And you know, I mean, I guess one day it would be really nice to just kind of refactor the character screen. That's the thing we really need to get to sometime, because you know we actually went into that with a plan to have it so that like for every stat it would have like this big breakout menu which like shows exactly how it's calculated with all the things. But it got so complicated we actually had to remove that. It was like actually before pre-closed beta, we actually had that system working. And actually you could hover over a gem and it was like really ugly. But you could actually see like a full like debug dump basically of like how the stat came to get to its current value. And that was like a thing that would be really good. And like, you know, it's kind of like you almost want like an article of like how it works alongside like the calculation for you of like how it would. I mean, once again, I'd really love to do this stuff. It's just that, you know, it's so hard to get to that stuff. And, you know.
It would be difficult to keep it concise, really.
Exactly.
Now that you've come,
and like
to keep it up to date as well.
A lot of skills, when the new player finds said skill, they won't even be able to use all the support gems for it. So it might say you should use greater multiple projectiles, but you're not in Act 4 yet, so
it needs to be context sensitive so that it basically shows you, you know, what's unavailable for you right now, like what would be, you know, what you can use and that kind of stuff. And it's just something like that one. The thing for skills, I think we'll probably be able to do within the next expansion or two. I don't know exactly, but for other mechanics, like, you know, and once again, it's just hard. Keeping that kind of documentation up to date is like surprisingly difficult, especially because the people who are writing it are more likely, like the thing I was just saying about like someone who knows the game well enough. It's like the reason why they're going to know this stuff is because they know the game because it's long established mechanics. But then when it comes to actually updating that for like an expansion, it's like the person who made a balance change that like affects like a calculation or like how something works. I mean, they're going to write a commit note and then that'll end up in the patch notes, but like it's not always completely going to be obvious to someone else on the team who then has to write the documentation for it. So it's like, it's actually surprisingly, you know, even actually writing the patch notes is like surprisingly difficult. Like, because like, you know, some programmer will commit something, right? And like he's got an issue number and like, but he writes like some tiny little, and the issue probably describes like some big long thing about why it's changing and blah, 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 blah. But when the guy actually writes the commit note, it might sound like something innocuous that someone that's scanning through all the changes and is like looking for things to patch note can easily miss. And this is why sometimes there are like things that actually like can be surprisingly important that we just missed out of the patch notes. Like it's not like we're intending to miss that stuff. It's just that like the person doing it like literally just didn't notice. It didn't know it was important because like, that designer just happened to not be involved with that change, and therefore they didn't understand. And then when they saw the commit note, it was like, oh, made some changes to like, you know, leech or something like that. And they see that and they just like assume that wasn't important, and then actually it was actually hugely important. And so then, you know, it's actually surprisingly tough.
There's pretty clearly some discrimination going on against the summoner guy in the office. I'll just say that, because over the years there's been a lot of missed out patch notes.
I mean, as I said, we never intend, like we really do intend to patch note everything. It's just you know, like there's always a way to find out more. Like so I mean, the way our issue system works is like, you know, so when you commit a thing, there's like an issue number associated with that, and you can look up that issue and like find the detailed information about what's, you know, like why something was needed. But if you didn't think it was important, you're probably not going to do that, especially when there's like 10,000 changes to look through. And like a lot of them, like most of the changes are going to be things that are so innocuous, like they're just like fixing little bugs, or they're just like making, you know, some change to the art that like doesn't like actually. I mean, that's why we always have that like made incremental changes to art and sound effects and stuff like that, just because that's sort of, it's the dragnet of like random changes that artists just make constantly, just tweaking random things. And none of those commits are important to generate in the patch notes, so they just get skipped by the person who's processing them. So yeah, we try to like show the patch notes to each designer after they've been written and say like, was there anything that it looks like you worked on in here that isn't in here, just in case. You know, there's a sort of final thing, but you know, people still forget stuff.
To backtrack a little bit, when you said that, you know, it'd be nice to have more things to ease new players in there, have you guys ever considered having like a recommended build option or anything like that, just for complete starters?
So, interestingly, that's actually a thing in the Chinese client. I actually don't love it, and that's the reason why it's not in the Western version. So it's one of those things where, like, okay, so like this is kind of more of a philosophical thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like I actually would prefer that people's first experience with Path of Exile is not following a build guide. They just kind of play around, and that's kind of one of those things where it's like I feel like it's kind of an out-of-date view in some ways. Like I can absolutely see the argument for like someone who's following a build guide may very well have more fun playing their first time playing through Path of Exile, and that's kind of unfortunate to me. That it's like that, because I actually really do prefer that sort of feeling of discovery. And I think it's just kind of to do with the kind of player that I am. So what we decided to do, and so it's actually been in there for like a few expansions, is there's this thing where each expansion in the Chinese version, there are 3 recommended builds, and they're different each expansion that you can try to play. And we actually what we try to do is make it so those 3 builds are in some way using the new skills or balance changes that we've made in order to kind of make it a bit more interesting. So it's kind of like it's in a way it's sort of like here's the meta. And what they do is I think we give them the first I think it's maybe like 30 or 40 skill points that you have to allocate, something like that. Because there's like the build. A lot of people actually don't know about the build planning system in the actual game client, by the way, because it's like relatively well hidden. But they effectively come in with a plan of like what exact skill points to allocate from the start, and it also whenever it says a skill gem to pick, it says like recommended for whatever we named that build, and that's like the first one on the left, and it also does that on the support gems. And so that's kind of the 2 parts. There's the skill gems and the skill tree. So I mean, there's nothing really stopping us from putting on the Western. Like we could literally just turn it on. But it's just like something about it makes me feel uneasy. So,
I mean, it goes against
the
nature of PoE, right? You're like
right,
lost.
exactly,
You don't really know what you're doing, and you're supposed to just kind of just go at it and grow on your own.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like I can absolutely see the argument for it, and like I could imagine having heard this, like a bunch of community members right now are probably typing in chat, you should totally have this in the Western version or whatever. So tell me if that's the case, because I'm actually not looking at Twitch chat. It's kind of like I don't know, like I really have 2 minds about it. So we decided to try it on the Chinese version, and I don't really, obviously since I've always kind of had it, I don't really know like whether it's kind of been better or worse for them. But yeah, that's an interesting thing.
Could you like maybe?
So yeah, tell me what you think.
I was gonna say, could you maybe like compare like player retention for like starter accounts, see if they have like a higher like more people stick around or something?
So the problem is that in China they've always had this feature, and I wouldn't want to compare Chinese players to the Western players because they've got a different realm and there's different stuff going on. So I don't think the data set would be comparable. So I suppose what we could do is we could do an A/B test on our players and enable it and disable it, which would be kind of an interesting study. Although I'm actually a little bit philosophically against A/B testing as well. Just because, I mean, especially with like with the crowd we have where everyone can communicate in chat, it's like, well, why am I getting this? Why is he getting this feature? I want that feature, that kind of stuff. Like kind of this thing. It's like as soon as you start having different things for different players, people say, well, that's unfair. Why does he get it and I don't, and that kind of stuff.
Why don't you just try it for PS4, since that's upcoming? I
mean, we could do, but then once again, you wouldn't be able to compare the data set.
True.
And if we're trying to answer the question of like, do we want this to be on worldwide PC? I mean, I guess so yeah, that's actually one of the few things that is different about the Chinese version of PoE, other than of course the the censorship of some of the art.
Chat is unanimously spamming that they want guides. Absolutely,
they do want. But the thing is, this system here is
just kidding.
So
it's the opposite. Nobody wants.
Oh really? Really? It's not?
They're all all of them hate it.
Yeah,
all of them hate it.
Everybody agrees with you.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So I feel like maybe we did make the right call on that one. But yeah, this is an interesting one.
I think philosophically, people in general would like you to just stick to your guns, right? Your conviction on that.
So another possibility, though, would be to add more support for if you do want to get a build guide, some kind of. So we've got a standardized file format for passive skill trees, but maybe we could have a standard file format for other elements of the build. I'm not exactly sure how that would work. So that like if you did want to load one, maybe there'd be like things the game like you could sort of reflect that in game, so you don't have to like go out of game as much for that. And I don't know how much really value there is in that. I mean, obviously for passive skill, it's like skill tree, it's really useful because you can like you're allocating those all the time as you level. I don't know how much value there is really for like stuff like items because it's like, well, I mean, does it help to have like what uniques you need on the side of this like character or something? I don't know, like maybe. Does it help to have like what skill gems you need? Maybe it does. I mean, you might as well just use a website as soon as you're going. So yeah, I don't know if there's really value there.
One thing I just would say though, and you have to keep this in mind, this is what makes it like really difficult, is the kinds of people who are gonna watch Baeclast to see a live development
yes, they're going to be the kind of people who,
exactly. Especially since
and of course,
it's so early in the morning in so many
audience.
places, and yeah.
And I should mention, by the way, that with the with the build guide thing, the way that works is that when you start the game, I don't know if it's I'm not sure exactly when it is. I think it might be I don't think it's like the moment you log in, but it's like after like somewhere partway through the area. I think it might be when you get your first skill point. I think it asks you, okay, so here's prominently 3 builds you could pick from that are this league's builds, and then underneath it says no, I want to do it by myself, and so that's kind of like the options that we're presenting in that way. So I mean, what we could do is, I suppose another option is have it a more sort of subtle, like, oh, here's some like things just in case you want to use this kind of stuff, or I don't know. But then it feels like if you're doing that, you'd want to have like more builds available or whatever like that, rather than just 3. And then you start to get down a whole rabbit hole of like how they get generated and stuff like that. And, yeah.
I mean, realistically, it's exactly what Tarke said, right? Because even if you were to do some sort of research about this, then the people who already know about it, already know what to do in the game, wouldn't want it. But then the people who aren't interested in like going on a website and looking up this information because they just started the game, this information would never reach them, or a poll or something like that.
If you could,
I mean, maybe we should do an A/B test for it. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like maybe our existing player base wouldn't care if we did that because it's kind of a new player thing anyway. And we could avoid doing the A/B test for accounts that had already
existed over a certain age or
something. Exactly. So I mean, that would be the kind of thing. And I guess you'd want to do that anyway because you'd want to basically see like for new players. And then there's also the question of like how long do you check, like have they come back after like, I suppose actually the ultimate question for an A/B test for us is like, does someone who plays whose first league is a given league, do they come back next league to play again? That's like the ultimate like victory for us, is like, because the moment you come back to play a second league, you're very likely to come back and play a third one and so on. So yeah, that's kind of like our victory condition.
See, I have a really interesting. Go on, Octavian.
That's the people you'd be trying to reach, and that's the people who would like you'd really want an answer on a survey from, is the people who pick up the game, play for like 3 hours, and then put it down, and know why they put that down, and if a guide would have helped them stick around longer.
Right. So surveys though are a double-edged sword, because a lot of the reason why people say that they're leaving is not the actual reason. It's actually interesting because once again, in the Chinese realm, Tencent's really big on surveys. Like we're actually not big on that at all, because once again I sort of feel uneasy about that data set. So they do it all the time, and they give us the results of these surveys obviously because they're interested in us seeing them. But I kind of don't know how valuable they are. Like I mean, in some ways I think that they're more valuable in raising problems than they are in kind of giving us a sort of like a sort of why did you leave is less useful than like knowing like when they left and like seeing what they were doing around the time they were leaving. And they also do some of that analysis, which is also very interesting. Like there are certain times like this quest, like people don't like it and they tend to leave after doing it. Like one of the early quests, maybe we can make some changes to that and that kind of stuff. But honestly, like in general, I would say we're not particularly data driven. Like we tend to do things more by the gut than by looking at numbers. So that's kind of just our style.
So what is this like the thing you're trying to solve with adding in like a build specifically? Is it just to make them not get lost and stick around?
Yeah, basically it's to make so the idea is to make people feel like not get too overwhelmed. Like basically give some instructions like if you don't know what to do, then just do this. It's kind of like a relatively is a relatively useful thing. And once again, I do understand why that's good, but it's just like, so there's this other thing. It's like, okay, so if you give someone training wheels and they're used to playing the whole game with training wheels, then when the training wheels come off, then they become overwhelmed, and maybe you didn't even help anything. Like you might have not actually changed anything in the long run. And so this is why I have a problem a little bit with some of that sort of optimization of like, okay, there was something actually the developers of Warframe said at a talk at GDC that I saw, which was very interesting, which is that like basically what they said was like, there's almost no point in actually improving the new player experience, they said, which sounds terrible, but they actually said the reason was when they did so many things over the years to try and improve the new player experience, and they found that none of it actually mattered. Because the thing that really gets people into the game is when they've got a friend who plays it and they like tell them, oh, you do this and do that. Like they actually have like help from the community. And so if you don't have that, you're unlikely to bounce off it. It's like if the game is complicated, you're going to bounce off it at some point if you're not the type of person who's going to be interested. So you might as well just be bounced off early rather than late and save us some server costs, if you know what I mean. So I don't 100% know whether I agree with that. I don't 100% know whether I agree with that. But on the other hand, there is something to that, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I watched that entire thing as well from Warframe on that. And I don't know. As a player, I don't completely agree that something just tells me that it can't be, because they were trying essentially what you were doing with the A/B testing, with the you give players tutorials, so like full-fledged ways of like this is how you play the game, rather than giving players like resource to either figure out how does it work, or giving them more a better UI. I think the better UI is something that's big.
Well, we certainly want to improve anything we can in terms of like getting information where it should be. And I think that the bar is that if a experienced player would want to have that as a reference in game, then it's definitely something that needs to be in the game at some point. Like, as I said, like the thing about the quick thing of like what gems do I use the skill? Like, even an experienced player needs to know that, right? Like they haven't necessarily used the skill before, they need to just look it up, right? Like it's the thing where it's like that information about builds and so on, that is probably good to get like, where we can in there. But then on the other hand, I mean, there's lots of community resources, and those community resources are pretty good. So
Go on, Octavian.
On the topic of Warframe and how you mentioned that they saw really good results whenever someone was brought in through a friend or through an acquaintance, would it then make sense to implement a system that might introduce players to other community members who can help them? So like, I think EVE Online has a chat that's fully devoted to trying to help new players and that sort of thing.
I mean, maybe. I mean, the thing is, I actually haven't thought too much. I haven't actually thought too much about that. But I sort of wonder, like, I mean, I'd be interested to know some ideas about how that would best work.
It would be really difficult to moderate that sort of thing and make sure that it's not just full of jerks. But
yeah, those systems are really hard to design, because if you and the problem is if you do something slightly wrong, then people will just not use it, and it's kind of this abandoned thing, and then noobs will go and look at that, and they're like, oh, there's no one to help me, and then it kind of feels like it actually feels worse for them. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you have to be really careful introducing something like that. And the other problem as well, and something extra dangerous about those types of systems, is that if you introduce something like that and it's bad on day one, then it will get a bad reputation, and even if you improve it later, people may never go back to it. So you have to make sure when you're introducing something like that that you actually get it right first time. So yeah, it can be a bit dodgy.
One quick thing, because I think so this is everyone in this call. Hey, I'm new to the game, what do? We say, go watch Engineering Eternity's guide. Like, we just say, like, go watch this guide. Have you considered, like, changing the way you do something like Build of the Week? Like, having something like that out, like, just before the league comes out? So that way it can be, like, a recommended build for people or something?
It could be a good idea. Sorry, there's just mosquitoes attacking me. Anyway, that could be a good idea. Something I'd actually like to improve sometime is the game patcher. To include more links to those kinds of resources there. I suppose the problem with that though is that I think slightly over 50% of our player base is on Steam, and especially new players tend to come in via Steam as well these days, because obviously a lot of these days most people, you hear about a game, you go search Steam for it, you don't even bother going elsewhere. So that means that a lot of new players come in that way, and so we kind of I guess because of that we probably don't really have a good reason to sort of get those players. But the nice thing about doing it with the patcher is it's like before you've even played the game, you've got some time while you're downloading to to look at some stuff.
I don't know if it's Smite, but I think it is Smite. They have that in their patcher, and that was actually really helpful for me because I just tried it out of a whim, and it just also played some tutorial videos. And there's nothing to do while you wait for it to patch, so it's like,
Yeah, you might as well watch them. Yeah, no, I mean, it's probably a good idea. Probably a good idea. Do you know if Smite has a Steam version, actually?
No idea.
I can go check.
No, don't even bother. It's fine. It was just a casual question.
Just real quick also, since we were speaking so much about the Chinese version, a lot of players struggle early on with examples or understanding what a decent-ish items early on looks like. And then I know on the Chinese realm, from certain quests, you actually get unique item drops. Have you ever considered putting that into the main game so that maybe a gold rim drops from like the crab, and then somebody has an example? Oh, this is actually a decent item that I can equip.
Is that even
That it's somebody
true?
they can compare it to. It's not.
No,
That's what we've
it might
heard.
be. It might be. I actually don't know.
Is what true? The difficulty players have
No,
evaluated.
So
the
do they drop uniques from? Is that?
Oh, the
I
Chinese realm.
actually seriously don't know about that.
Well,
it doesn't.
actually, I'm
strike
not
me-
100% because I've never tested it, but that's what we've heard
doesn't-
when the Tencent races were going on.
It doesn't sound like the kind of thing we would do.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So I don't know. There's a few things that are done directly by Tencent in their version that we didn't like, that I haven't done.
Right.
If you know what I mean. So I mean, they sort of control their published version, like they can do stuff. So I'm not 100%. It's possible that that's like that, and we did it. I just don't know about it. But yeah, I honestly don't know about that.
Yeah, it could be something like even quest rewards, because right now quest rewards basically boil down to you've got the base of the item, which a lot of players would recognize, but the stats are completely randomized. So these players, they pick up an item and they see the stats of it, but they don't really know if it's good or bad.
Yeah.
But if you were to have like comparisons for just a baseline of a character, would maybe improve leveling, for instance, or give people a better idea of what to look for in the actual end game for the builds that they use.
Maybe. Yeah, I honestly don't have a good opinion for that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of getting away from what I've thought too much about.
That's fair. Yeah. To kind of get slightly back more on topic, we're still kind of in the same kind of ballpark. So like GG's gone backwards and forwards a lot on like the amount of choice you give to players when it comes to how much like we can customize PoE. Recently we've had it with like loot filters and how much we can change with that. Do you think we would ever see like more control over something like UI or like death recaps or VFX sliders for skills, that kind of ballpark?
Okay, well you've got several.
Yeah, I put a lot into that question. Yeah, I know, I loaded that up quite high.
Simply yes or no.
I personally, okay, so loot filters I am absolutely fine with. You know, like it's good to have that kind of customization. I think if you go too far with it though, you end up something like how World of Warcraft ended up, which I think, to my mind, is just a bit ridiculous. You know, like where they've got like, you know, the end result of that is like, okay, you've got things popping up on the screen like as you're fighting a boss with like, you know, exactly what, like when to use certain skills and blah 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 blah. And I don't think we really want to go down that road, to be honest. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't still more customization options we could have, but you know, yeah, like that kind of thing is you know, not what I particularly like. The second one on your list was, what was it again?
Death recap.
Death recap.
Death recap. Okay. That's not really about player customization. That's more about like, you know, just a feature, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I assume what you really want to know is like, you know, like what killed you, what could I have done, kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a system for that, like planned or otherwise, honestly. But I mean, it is something we know players want.
But like, have you had a conversation about it, like whether you're for or against it? Or
I'm not against it by any means, right? It's more of a technical thing of like, you know, like actually how would we do this? Like if I could click my fingers and have a death recap, I'd absolutely do it. But you know, I mean, I had no problem with it, right? Like it's an absolutely fine feature. It's just complicated, right? You know, because of lots of, you know, damage comes from a million places, and you know, and then like what information are you even wanting to surface, and like you know, yes, I mean, there's just a huge amount of issues there, which leads to any conversation we'd sort of start about that. It's kind of like, well, there's like this issue and that issue and the other issue, and so yeah, it's just complicated basically. And the last one I believe was
VFX sliders.
VFX sliders. Okay, so my goal there is to make it so you shouldn't have to slide a thing to make the game look worse, especially because of the fact that a thing that sucks about that is that, like, when you're at the start of the game and you're firing a few projectiles, there's no problem at all with the VFX. And so what needs to happen is that the more effects are on the screen, the more we scale things down in order to make things faster. Which I should mention is exactly what dynamic resolution is.
Yeah.
And it is actually very difficult at this point to get the game to run at under 60 FPS just from particle spam. I challenge you to do it with the caveat that you get server-side slowdown which looks like frame rate judder, but actually isn't.
Yeah.
On that
So
note,
that's
though,
the thing. So that's the thing I would say is that I actually suspect that you would actually not see much performance difference at all, even if we like reduce the number of particle effects to like 1/10 of what they are. I suspect you actually wouldn't see the game run faster.
see, but it's not
and
necessarily
so-
an issue of like the game running faster. This is also
So
something
it's
you
just-
see a
just
lot more with
visual
like
spam,
groups.
right.
It's like actually be able to like see the screen. So like
Particularly
currently,
in party play, yeah.
yeah, I'm doing just duo gameplay with someone doing freeze pulse totems, and I'm doing some
Right.
ball lightning minion spam, and it's like I don't see anything, and that's with two fairly like vanilla builds.
Yeah.
So
So
would
that's
you
the
ever
thing
into like
that-
party play, like scaling down allies or something?
So I mean, once again, it's like, okay, like how do you do it in a way where you don't just have like, okay, I mean, it's like, so, okay, so like if you just cut number of particles, you're going to end up with a lot of wonky looking bullshit.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's kind of like it's really hard to find a good way to do that in a way that's going to be acceptable. Like, I don't want the game to look really bad. You know what I mean? Like especially because like the other thing as well is that streamers will always put it on whatever settings are going to be a best to play with, right? So that is to say, they're prioritizing gameplay over. Okay, I would say they're usually prioritizing gameplay over visuals most of the time. You don't agree with that? All right. Well, fair enough. Fair enough. If that's what you say.
In the case of streamers, I mean, you have to look at it in the same way that we have what you have in mind as well, right? The better
Right. You're
our
making the
game
game
looks, the better experience it is for the
Fair enough,
viewer.
I buy that. But I guess what I'm saying is that the problem with having it so that you can turn things like that off, especially when they're not really affecting performance all that much, is that you get the situation where it's like people's first experience with the game might be watching someone play in like, with a game that looks like garbage and think that's what the game looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is a concern that we have sometimes. That doesn't necessarily mean that, like, okay, obviously we want to make performance things where they're actually going to matter. Like, if something's actually going to make someone go from like playable to, from not playable to playable, that's a setting we want to have. But then there's also a lot of misconception about what things actually slow the game down and what does not. And so that means that like people sometimes request like, hey, why can't I do this or that or the other thing, when it really wouldn't actually affect performance very much. And so, like to bring up something that's been like really controversial is the shadows option, where only in DX9 can you turn shadows off. And I'm actually going to talk about this against my better judgment because I know this is going to be a big controversial thing. Because like, okay, so basically like, okay, so in shadows don't affect performance very much in DX11. And the reason that they don't is because in DX9, the cost of what they call a draw call is much higher. So a draw call is basically like drawing a single thing on the screen. So like a character or a piece of a tile or a projectile or something like that. Like you're just drawing one object basically. And in DX9, you can only do that on one core of your CPU. And that means that basically, and then for some more background info, when you add shadows to a scene, the way that works is that you basically draw the scene from the perspective of the light, and then basically whatever the light can see is not in shadow, and if the light can't see it, then it's in shadow, right? So that means that when you render a shadow map, the more you're increasing the number of objects that are being drawn by quite a lot, right? But actually rendering the shadow map is actually really fast, and that's because there's like the shader is like nothing, like there's like no detail, like you're literally just rendering like where the object is, like doing all the complicated lighting or anything like that. And also the fill rate on the GPU, fill rate is basically how fast you can render something. I'm getting really technical now, but whatever, I'm just going to do it anyway.
No, go for it.
The fill rate is you can render stuff at 4 times as fast if you're only rendering a shadow map. So basically what I'm saying is shadow maps are actually really fast to render. It's just that where they're slow is when you're in DX9 and you have to render a lot more objects because you can only do that on one thread. So in comes DX11, and like, okay, I've always hated how the game looks like without shadows. Like shadows on versus off is like such a massive difference in the game. Like it just makes the game go from looking like, like RuneScape, like original, to looking like an actually nice game. And so in DX11, So in DX11, we were basically said, okay, like we really are going to say like, no, you just can't turn them off. and actually the performance impact between in DX11, if we turn them on and off, especially now, is like almost nothing. And so, I mean, okay, maybe not almost nothing, but like negligible to the point. I'll tell you what, actually, DX9 is now slower with shadows off than DX11 is with shadows on. So that should tell you something about the speed, because, you know, like of that thing. So basically, there really isn't, and we've just basically said effectively now, like, yeah, we don't think that the game is okay without shadows. So, like, you know, we're having that as a minimum acceptable thing. And then one day, probably 4.0, we will probably actually really think pretty hard about removing DX9 entirely, which means dropping Windows XP support. Right now, DX9 is holding us back somewhat because every feature has to be working in DX9. And the only operating system that actually requires DX9 is Windows XP, which like very few people are using now. Actually, in 3.4.0, we actually accidentally broke Windows XP support, and no one noticed. And actually, I think we might have just patched in a fix for that. So anyone still out there rocking Windows XP, if that's not fixed for you yet, then it's being fixed like real soon. So, you know, yeah.
Just to clarify one thing and to cut you off a little bit there. One, I appreciate you turning shadows off IRL for that entire description. And two, I think one of the big things when it came to the VFX side is just to clarify, it wasn't so much from a performance point of view. It's just
I know,
when you're in groups and you like can't see.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just randomly ranting at this point just because there's a particular topic that I feel strongly about.
You're allowed to. We do it all the
Randomly
time.
ranting is
This is the
that's
place
our
to do
MO.
it. Yeah. This is the
So,
place
yeah.
to do it.
I think
I mean,
some level,
somewhere in there was an answer to that, I think.
I think on some level there's an argument to be made to the contrary, though, about, you know, not wanting someone to tune into a stream and see the graphics nuked down to the lowest, and VFX turned off and that sort of thing. And I can definitely understand that, but isn't it also a little bit overwhelming for someone to tune into a stream of like a 5-man party play and have literally no idea what's going on? Like, there's just no way to tell.
I do think this is something we should address, and it's possible that it's going to be a mixture of. I don't necessarily. If you're gonna argue that something is a gameplay problem, then I don't think that the answer to that should be a graphics option. Because I don't think graphics options are the place to solve gameplay problems, if you know what I mean. Like, it's kind of like, this shouldn't be a thing where it's like, oh, once you've got a certain build, change this graphics option, right? Like, it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah,
What I'm
takes
saying
it back
is
to the wanting to slow down attack and cast speed and that sort of
Yes,
thing.
but then once again, I don't think we can do that either because, you know, so then it becomes like, okay, we probably need to adjust the visuals of something. But I guess what I'm saying though is not so much that we should change the gameplay either. What it is that whatever we do should be automatic and in a way where, like, ideally you don't even think about it, you know? So if that means having like different VFX for party members or something for certain skills, or like, I mean, once again, I'm signing myself up for a huge amount of work if I say that. But basically, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's like things that we could think about doing where the player doesn't have to worry about it, but like it still somehow is addressed for them. That would be the ideal, you know? And so that's the kind of direction I would like to go down.
A lot of games, I mean, since you've mentioned Blizzard loads of times, I think WoW, this expansion will last just automatic if you're in a group above like 5 people. Basically, if you're in a raid, everyone else's animations just turn down just automatically, and it's just you still see it. It's just like not there as much.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. You know, like I'd much prefer to do something like that. So, and then I could imagine having an option to turn that off, if you know what I mean, like having an option to effectively bring back the spam if you really want it, or something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't want to have, which I suppose is a graphics option, but you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of the default should certainly be that like whatever is nice, but while still maintaining really good fidelity levels when that's not spam. You know, so that's my ideal way, and so, you know, that's what I hope to get to eventually.
I think from a player perspective. Okay. From a player perspective, it must, as long as you can see what you're doing is actually having an effect, you don't really care that the other guy is not, like, you're not immersed in his gameplay, right? So if he fires and doesn't connect in the same way, you can't see, like, you won't feel that you shot something and it wasn't there.
So, and I buy that argument. Once again, having it so that we had different projectiles for other people's skills, but you do want to know that they are firing, right? Like, you wouldn't want
of course.
Like, imagine if you just turned all the projectiles off, right? That would be terrible because then you wouldn't even understand what's going on in the gameplay. So you sort of need to have something. And so, I mean, maybe we could do some experiments or something with that, with like a few skills, or maybe like make it so that they try to have the VFX artists, like, for new skills, maybe like try making 2 variants while they're at it or something like that. Like, we could probably. I'll talk to some people about it, and we'll see. Like,
yeah, but that's exactly the thing.
It's just that, like, imagine if we had to go and like make new projectiles for every single skill in the game, right? Like, that's going to take a long time, and so then if we're gonna commit to that, we need to like think about it quite a bit. And so that's kind of why I would say there isn't like a good answer right now. I basically what I'm saying is stay tuned. I do definitely understand. I definitely understand where you're coming from, and there's a big problem. It's just
that's exactly the thing, that like players agree exactly with your perspective, and that's why they see this as the best solution, because we don't want movement speed nerf, we don't want a cast speed nerf, we don't want capped things. So this only seems natural. That it's the only way to do it. Yeah.
Well, anyway, we stay tuned, right? We'll have more discussions, and I can't promise something's going to happen in the next expansion or anything, but like we'll definitely. I certainly hear there's a problem.
No, I appreciate that, and I had to put you on the spot for that, because otherwise I'd have been fired from Twitch. Like I'd have been, you never asked him about that one thing,
Yeah.
So before we get into more like rapid QA things at the end, does anyone want to like mention any more like bigger topic stuff before we get into more specific-y things?
Okay, I had one thing.
Go for it.
Right. So so you talked about just earlier with the Chinese film, they would have like the preset, what's it called, like the passive tree? Yeah.
The build planner, yeah.
So is that why you hired OpenRL? So that you could take
right. You mean
so you could take POB builds like a loot filter and apply them in game.
No. We actually hired him just because it's very hard to find gameplay programmers who actually know the game very well, right? So like of the people who know the game, he knows the game very well. And so he was also in Australia, which is like obviously handy for New Zealand. And they actually, if you're an Australian, you can work in New Zealand without even getting a work visa, which is really handy. So he basically applied, and we're just like, absolutely, we can do that. We interviewed him, and that was really good. So we didn't have any specific plans about like, he should work on this feature or that feature or whatever. It was totally about like, we need more gameplay programmers. Here's a guy who like, and it's been great actually, because he's been like, most gameplay programmers we hire, like they have to have this like whole long training period of like not understanding how the game really works and having to be like walk through every tiny little detail and everything like that. So he was able to hit the ground running pretty quickly, and that's been really nice.
Awesome.
I think everyone in the community was happy when they saw that post, because they're just like, that was a feels good one. Okay, then, so you're right to go into the rapid Q&A stuff then?
Yeah.
Okay then, so one thing that I've been asked a lot, do you guys have any plans on how like master signature mods will be obtained going forward? So like minus mana cost and Elrion rings or stuff like that?
Yes, we do.
Fine, I answered that question for you.
Killing Elrion?
Yes, with the
Killing Vegas.
gender counterparts, how will the which female part be named?
We do have a plan to bring back those mods, yes.
Okay,
Come on, Tarke.
Yeah, I did say yes, no, burn through them. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I get it.
We've already covered the bestiary question. Are there any plans to like change how the delve ladder works? And also, there's a lot of confusion. Like, how exactly do you like access delve going forward?
So it is basically the same as it was before, except rather than having sulfite in every area, there is sulfite in less areas, but more veins. And when they do spawn, like if it's a sulfite area, like if it's a sulfite zone, then there's way more sulfite in the area to find. I don't know what the exact balance with regard to like what percentage of your time you spend in delve and that kind of stuff is exactly. But I do know it's certainly not going to be reduced to the extent that that would be reflective of how many areas you find it in, if you know what I mean. Like it is going to be like, it'll be oversized compared to before per, like, in terms of number of nodes in the area. So that means that like, but then overall, of course, it will be reduced because it's no longer like the league mechanic, right? So it's obviously going down. I don't know the exact percentage, like Mark.
But it's more like 10%, like it is with Breach and Abyss, or you're
no, I
looking
think
for
we're going
something
more
higher?
than that. I think it's more than 10%. Like, once again, don't quote me. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, it is. From what I have overheard, I believe it's going to be more than what that Breach and Abyss are. but less than obviously what some players might like if they're like, no, I want to only delve.
But
so,
people
yeah.
can enter the mines themselves whenever they want.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, obviously you've got your hideout, so you go there and you've got the NPC there, and you enter the mine.
And this is separate from the Nico dailies and all these sort of quests.
So what the way, actually, I think there's a post about how the dailies work later, so I probably shouldn't talk about that just because otherwise Bex will be annoyed. But yeah, there's stuff to do with that yeah. They don't work the same as before, though. That I will tell you. Yeah. Yeah, and that, by the way, is also similar to Incursion, which now you're going to be encountering several incursions in one map. Which is actually really tricky, by the way, to implement for reasons that are kind of complicated. But yeah, you'll get several incursions per map, but then you'll encounter it less often, you know what I mean? So basically the intention is that, because the problem is otherwise it would be like, oh, I only get to do a final temple like once every frickin' forever. Whereas if we can do like, once you've found an incursion map, there's going to be like 3 incursions in there, and it won't take that many incursion maps to do a full temple, if you know what I mean. So
it's
yeah,
like you only have to encounter Alva like 3 times because it will add up rather than having to like...
Exactly, up to... Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever considered having it like tied into the Atlas? Like, with
the answer to that is wait till the announcement about how dailies work.
Okay.
This is a quite specific question that you may not have the answer to, but do you know if there will be prophecies for the new masters, or is Master Seeks Help just being phased out?
I was in a conversation about that, and that was a question that we had, and I don't remember whether the answer to that was yes or no. It was discussed recently, like in the last few days. I just honestly cannot remember what we decided.
I worry that like the competitive delve ladder might be compromised by that. If basically to be able to compete at pushing the highest levels, you have to buy Nico Seeks Help.
I will raise that because I'm pretty sure that didn't come up in the conversation about that. So that is a thing to talk about. Yes. So with regard to the delve ladder, I mean, the delve ladder will still be there. You can absolutely still... I mean, basically, so we changed to a system whereby we can tag each character with several different things, so we can make more ladders in the future. And you might have noticed that there's a... like you can sort by delve ladder. And we probably over time we'll actually add a few more ladders as well for various other elements. I don't know what they're going to be exactly, but there's going to be more ladders in the future. And yeah, basically delve will just be another. It'll be there on the league. You can see, what the progress is.
While we're talking about delve, do you guys have any plans about like changing fossil farming? Is it staying as is, or?
I don't remember what it was.
But is it like a conversation you're having, basically?
There was definitely a conversation about this.
Okay.
I know that. Okay, so here's the thing. So this is an interesting one actually, because Mark 2, right? When you talk to him about this, what he says is, I don't understand why this would be controversial because if you were doing something else, you'd be getting more net worth per hour. And the reason why he thinks that way is because he's up there in red maps, like, doing stuff like, he is one of the people who has really high net worth per hour. So he feels like fossil farming is not actually worthwhile, right? He does actually thinks it's fine because it's not actually worth doing. You don't get enough net worth from that. But that is an extreme opinion, right? Because the reason he feels that way is because he's like actually top tier with regard to like the more traditional ways of doing that stuff, right? So I don't actually agree with him with regard to that. I think because there's something about fossil farming that feels cheap, and I think that's actually a factor that should be considered. I suspect that there's more to talk about this, but as I said, I heard a conversation about this, and I believe that I think the jury's still out on that. These kinds of details, like those kinds of balance things, are actually very easy to change. And so they're kind of like very easy to change right up until the last minute because it's really just a question of tweaking a few things. Actually, the bulk of the hardness is the discussion about it, and that kind of happens over the course of the entire thing. It's like the actual change could be like, literally the last day. It's just a question of like, what the balance is. So yes, I suspect that there's still going to be argument going back and forth on that for a while. I do believe that there might be some balance changes with regard to which fossils are common and which ones are more there and stuff like that.
Yeah, so
Maybe some
no more
balance
dense
changes
fossils.
to expect. I'm not going to say anything specific about exact balance stuff because I don't know, but I know that there was some discussion about certain fossils being changed in terms of rarities and or other stuff. But yeah.
Another thing that I'm being spammed at quite heavily by chats, like I made a video recently about, with the whole state of like lab enchants at the moment and like helm enchants feeling increasingly like scuffed. Do you guys think enchants are fine or?
I heard someone the other day talking who mentioned that, and so I suspect that that's one of those things which is on the radar but probably not getting addressed in 3.5.
When you say mentioned that, you mean my video and channel specifically, yeah?
I mean, what I mean by that is like I overheard another staff member, or rather it was an offhand comment of like, oh, but the meta of this is bad or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's like one of those things where it's like I don't like I sort of heard someone, I sort of recall like maybe a week or two ago that someone said that, or maybe it was a few days, or I don't know. But at some point someone mentioned that, and I registered it in my mind. But so yes, people know, right? I mean, usually people know. It's just a question of whether or not it's being addressed this expansion. I suspect that's not being addressed this expansion, probably because we've got like an arse load of stuff to be getting along with. But yes, people know.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you guys want to ask any more questions, go for it. I'm happy after that one. I can go to bed. It's fine.
Right.
You can't show this on stream, Tarke. Cover yourself up. Come on, man.
Along the lines of the minus mana cost rings and the hits can't be evaded, are we still going to have access to old meta crafting options like prefixes and suffixes can't be?
The meta crafting options are in, yes.
Okay, good.
So the thing that I mean, I think someone told me that they were going to do a full explanation of this some other time. No, did we already post our explanation of master crafting? I don't know.
No.
Not that
No.
I've
No, we
seen.
didn't. Okay, that's probably coming. So yeah, I probably should stay away from that. But yes, those are any mod that you look at and go, I would see a reason for that to exist, will be available for you.
Okay.
So, we are removing some that literally nobody was using, but yeah, there's just to simplify things down a little bit.
Leo crafts, they're going to be gone.
I mean, it's not like it's
No,
not like
some
it's
of those
per
are
master,
actually
like,
useful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like it's done per master. Like we looked across all the masters and said like put them all in a big pool and said, okay, which of these need to stay, which of these can go. And I think we kept like quite a few of them. I actually remember at the start we were like, okay, so what are we keeping? We're keeping like enhanced damage, we're keeping life, we're keeping resists, we're keeping attributes, and that's like it, right? And then it's but then they need like all of the what do you call it? Like armor and evasion and stuff like that. Like, oh yes, we need those ones. And they were like, oh yeah, we need this, we need that, and the other thing. And then by the time we actually went to all the stuff that we actually needed, it like ended up being like most of the list anyway. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much like what it is for items, right? Because in a way, you want to keep
Yeah.
some of the bad things too, so that way you can protect your other crafts if you were to multi-craft or maybe exalt something.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, basically anything that ended up being useful, we ended up keeping. But now of course you don't have to grind the master levels. You just once again, I don't think we announced yet how to do that, so I'm probably spoiling an article if I talk about that. But yeah.
Right. One thing actually to kind of go back to Betrayal, is there like a proper reason why we never really get new league stuff in lab? And like, do you think Betrayal will turn up there? Like, is that a tech thing? Or just
a lot of the reason is just because it's either like doesn't make sense from the point of view of like why is the stuff in here. I know that sounds a bit weird given that there's like stuff that's a bit odd sometimes, like why are things showing up in the belly of the beast and stuff like that. But basically like and then there's also like terrain gen considerations, because the terrain gen in the labyrinth is a little bit different, and like you'd have to like there's quite a lot of areas and they'd have to like make space for it and things like that. It's like a variety of reasons, and it just kind of ends up that way. So yeah, I mean like. Yeah, I know that doesn't really sound like a very satisfying answer, but like
it makes complete sense, to be honest.
It just kind of ends up that way. Yeah.
On the topic of the new league, are investigations going to be character specific, or like account wide? If you know.
They are character specific. Because it's kind of like incursion. I'll tell you what I might do actually, and I just thought of this like literally on the spot. Is I might make the intelligence meter for the overall major boss be league specific, which is what we call account specific, because it's actually specific to a league. But the individual safe house is character specific, because the cadence of you doing a safe house is a lot like incursion. And so, I mean, no one had a problem with that being character specific in incursion, because it's kind of like you cycle through it, if you know what I mean. Whereas the larger goal probably should be league specific, because it's kind of like a thing you want to work up to over time. So that's probably what I'll do. But as I said, I just thought of that, and there may be reasons. But yes, that's the.
Wouldn't you be concerned when it comes to something like this? Wouldn't you be concerned that possibly somebody would make 2 different types of characters to engage with that content, or would that be a positive that somebody can just basically maybe make a mapping character and get through this, and then once he gets to the final boss, he can have a separate character that he will specifically use to kill that boss only?
That is a concern, and that's why when I said that I just came up with this, I hadn't.
Right.
I was telling you, like, you know, just yet, like that's not a feature promise. That's just I'm just thinking. I literally just thought about it on the head. So yeah, I'm like, once again, that's the kind of thing where I talk to Mark too, and it'd be like he'd raise that, and I'd be like, and then we'd discuss it for a while, and then
right. But
that's the kind of thing.
From a design point of view, do you think that possibly is that something that GGG likes, basically, when it comes to this sort of stuff, that you have multiple different characters for this sort of content?
I honestly don't want to have a decision. It's honestly slightly further outside my comfort zone of like wanting to make a decision about whether or not, like, I think the answer is it depends, and I'm not sure, and it kind of like I know it when I see it kind of thing. It's like, you know, like for example in Delve, our first thought, which is the reason why it was character specific, was exactly that concern of like, okay, you can't really prove, like, we were thinking about this of like, okay, what if you got one character who's more better at delving than others, and like you can't really, we kind of liked the concept of it being per character, because it's kind of felt like it's like this character's progressive, you know what I mean? But then when the community members actually sort of got to it, they were like, oh no, we really don't want to do this, and they were like, okay, whatever, we'll throw away that like thing. That was like, that wasn't really like a big hill to die on, if you know what I mean. But that was their original reasoning, was that feeling. But then once again, like I felt differently in other situations. So yeah, it honestly just sort of depends. Like it's a feeling thing, and it sort of depends on just the specifics of that league. And
so it's difficult to make a call.
It is difficult to make a call, like in general. But yeah, as I said, when you see specifics, then it's like, oh, maybe I kind of feel like this way or the other way. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with the Atlas and bosses on the Atlas too, where you don't have it really as a journey on one character. Most of the time, you're spreading it out across multiple.
Yeah.
I know this is very much like not your job, but again, I'll be shouted at if I don't ask it. Stat sticks. Does anyone at GGG know they're kind of good?
We had a real. Okay, this actually is my domain.
Oh, okay then.
A little bit. Okay, not in the sense that I'm the one designing the changes exactly, although I kind of am actually in this case. We had long conversations. We've had some long conversations about stat sticks. I will say that. For a while, we were totally going to address them this league. And then we chickened out a little bit, and then we weren't sure, and then we decided to change some stuff. And then, like, I think, I actually think there is some changes coming for stat sticks this league. I actually think there are. But I don't know whether or not they were really finished, and so I don't want to commit to one way or the other. But suffice to say, we definitely know about it. We've got some really tricky questions around, like, what do players even want going on. I think that for the more hardcore players, such as yourselves, I think the general feeling is negative about them. But then even that is hard to really quantify. It's, so, I mean, we've got a rigged spectrum here of like, do we even want to allow them to exist at all? Do we want to severely restrict how they can be used? Do we want to, there's a lot of questions. There was a case that Rory brought to me, and I don't unfortunately remember the specifics. So my feeling originally was like, oh yeah, I'm fine with stat sticks, and they're fine, whatever. Like people use like a dagger, even like and a wand, even though like they're not using the dagger at all. That's fine. That doesn't seem so bad. And then you hear there was an example Rory told me, and after I heard that, I was like, you know what? I'm actually really disliking this. This is starting to get bad. And so I don't remember exactly what it was, but there's going to be changes. I just don't know when they're exactly going to come. It might even be 3.5. I'd have to check in with some people about that. The last time I talked about them, like we scheduled some stuff in for this league, but I just don't quite exactly remember. So yeah, it's a thing though that is going to happen, and expect a balance post. I'm sure at some point, whether it be this league or some point in the near future. Maybe if it isn't this one, it'll probably be next one, because it's definitely a hot topic.
I don't envy you at all. Like, I've just had, 2 hours of being spammed by chat, and I'm already, like, done with stat sticks, so I can't imagine the amount of anger you guys
it's really
get.
divisive, actually.
Yeah.
It's really divisive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's... I honestly don't know where we're landing right now. I'd have to check in again.
Yeah.
So, in my impression, the general consensus is that people are generally fine with them as long as the other things are viable too.
Yeah.
Which in this case, a lot of people have a problem with
definitely.
two-handers.
Yeah, so I think the answer that I had, sorry, the example I had from Roy, which I once again don't remember, was something where I just heard it and I was like, yeah, this is something's got to change here.
Oh, go on.
Sort of tangentially related to that, again, a quick specifics that you might not directly have the answer to is whether or not a veiled item can be Shaper or Elder touched.
I don't know the answer to that.
That's fine.
I don't know the answer. It maybe.
We'll get that in the next few weeks, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I'm sure someone knows, but I don't know.
One thing I did want to say, and also just the thing I said earlier about statistics, that was more of a joke. I was aiming at chat. Does it sometimes get frustrating that when there is some like an outlier ability that you guys are clearly aware of it, people will pretend as if like, how can they not know their own game? Does that ever get like really frustrating kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that is frustrating. That is frustrating. Yeah, like the whole like, oh, Gigi doesn't even play their game memes is like so ridiculous. Like, you know, it's like we know. The thing is, I think that and honestly, I think that most of the team, for good reason, are afraid to talk about things that before we've really fully decided what we're going to do. Now, obviously, as a founder and someone at the top of the company, I feel less restricted to be able to talk about that kind of stuff. I'm less likely to make a terrible faux pas.
Was that Chris just telling you to stop?
Yeah, probably. So I'm less likely to make a kind of faux pas. So that's kind of why I feel a bit more confident in being able to talk about things, even though we may not have an exact solution right now. Yeah, I mean, usually we do know, right? We know about issues. Like people, you know, like we read things. We read Reddit. We read, you know, like we watch people's videos that streamers make and so on. Like it's, you know, we really do look at these things. But yes, you know, it's funny. Like people always say to us, "Oh, how did you make such a huge expansion every 3 months?" And it's like, well, you know, yeah, I mean, something's got to give, right? Like not everything can be addressed every expansion. Not every problem you have can be the thing that we address this particular expansion. And so, you know, there's a lot of work there. So yeah, that's the reality of making a live game that, you know, is we can't fix every little thing every time, but we will get to it eventually. We'll get to it eventually. Whatever your problem is, you know, I want to fix it.
Does it happen frequently where you make a change based off of the fact that you know something, but the community hasn't discovered it yet, and before they do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does this happen like frequently, or?
I wouldn't say frequently, but I mean, you know, it definitely happens.
Okay. Because sometimes, people don't really understand changes, but then they don't really have the grand scheme of things, and that must be also pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the sake of not using up any more of your time, if anyone has any final questions, go for it. Otherwise, I think we should probably wrap up.
Right. Yeah, my throat's actually starting to get a little bit tired from talking for, what is it, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, sorry, we really...
Yeah.
You must understand this, please.
Yeah. But yeah, hopefully you know, enjoyed the podcast.
Oh no, it was absolutely amazing, and we will happily have you on in 2 weeks' time if you're free.
I don't know about that.
Whenever you feel like ranting maybe a little bit, we're totally here, you know, at any point.
We're always
It doesn't have to be set up.
Yeah.
This is a safe space for ranters.
Okay. Right.
One other final thing I will say is if you did make more regular appearances and stuff wasn't ready, you could then blame us because we were using up all of your time.
Right.
So it gives you an easy scapegoat.
I just blame Tarke for everything.
Yeah, just
already.
blame Tarke. It's what we do already.
Fair enough. Well, you know, maybe I can do this once per league. Maybe I can think about that. But yeah, probably not too much more often than that. It's probably better in the you know, after things are announced. You know, talk about new content and so on and what's coming up.
Well,
yeah.
on that note, then, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on, and I hope you have a nice evening,
worries.
and I hope you can still
you.
talk tomorrow.
Hopefully, yeah.
Right.
well.
I'll drop the call here, and then you can
Great.
peace out, and then my lot, we can then work out hosts and stuff afterwards. So that's
awesome.
it ended then. That's when the cut is, by the way. Because Raiz always has a go at me that I don't end this professionally. That was a professional ending, so
Yeah,
thank
very
you
good,
again.
very good. I thought it was. Yeah.
He's still gonna put all of this in the YouTube video, just by the way. It did not end there.